I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education for Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. Board members may attend and participate in board meetings in person and by electronic means in accordance with BVSD policy, BMEA, and state law. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez.
Here.
Medler.
Here.
Niznik. Quinlan Aweda.
Here.
Rajpal.
Here.
Sargent.
Here.
Unger.
Here.
Thank you.
Board members, I'd like you now, and guests, turn your attention to the screens for our land acknowledgement this evening.
The Boulder Valley School District resides and operates on land that is the ancestral homeland and unjustly and illegally taken territory of the Ute, Puebloan, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Apache, Navajo, and 48 other tribal nations historically tied to this land, who have called this land home since time immemorial. We acknowledge the atrocities committed here, including the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and efforts to alienate the indigenous inhabitants from their homeland, supported by the policies of the United States government. BVSD is aware of the many indigenous peoples, past and present, and their dignified nations and cultures, who care for this land with strength and resilience. BVSD recognizes the histories of the land in Colorado and the survival of many nations that carried their oral traditions into the present. It is BVSD's responsibility to educate ourselves, our community, and our students so that we can embrace the wisdom and knowledge of indigenous peoples and actively stand together to address injustices. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and honor the history, wisdom, oral traditions, and resilience of indigenous people, and recognize the responsibility to care for and appreciate this land together.
Thank you to our communications team who put that together. What's very well done. I'd like to remind everyone that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful and civically engaged lives. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in person here tonight and remotely. We're glad to have you observe and participate in our meetings. At this time, I'd like to see if there's a motion to approve our agenda. Moved by Kitty, seconded by Jorge. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez.
Yes.
Medler.
Yes.
Niznik.
Yes.
Quinlan Aweda.
Yes.
Rajpal.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next, I am excited to pass the meeting over to Dr. Anderson, who will be introducing our student moment for this evening.
Thank you, Board President Rajpal. Board members, as we all remember, earlier this fall, we had a couple very serious incidents in which BVSD students were hit while crossing Baseline Road near 95th Avenue. Tonight's student moment guest, Willow Fleetmeyer, an 8th grader at Nevin Platte Middle School, and her family and neighbors decided to take action to help protect students. She wrote about her experience in the Indian Peaks neighborhood newsletter, The Stroll, and now she's here to share her thoughts in person. Welcome, Willow. We are excited to have you this evening.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Willow Fleetmeyer, and I am going to be talking to you guys about the Indian Peaks Crosswalk Action from past, present, and future perspectives. I am 13 years old. I am an 8th grader at Platte Middle School. I have been in BVSD since kindergarten. I went to Douglas Elementary School. I have 2 older siblings. I'm a 360 leader at school, and I love to dance, I love to sing, I go to youth group, and I take the bus to school each morning. So turning back to the crosswalks, I'm going to talk to you guys about past, present, and future. So In the past, on Thursday, September 5th, and Friday, September 6th, 2 students were hit by cars at 2 different crosswalks on Baseline Road. I was walking home from school one day, and I live in an alley that you can see the end of, or not the end, but I can see Baseline Road. So I was walking up my alley, and I see the RTD, and it dropped off a couple kids, and I turned into my house. And then I saw my dad running up to the top of the road to see what all the commotion was about. So I walked up to the top of the road, and I saw somebody lying in the middle of the road, and then my dad told me to go home. So I went home, and my dad came home, and he was really, really scared. And I remember trying to comfort him, and then he had described the girl he had seen, and I had walked with her home the day before. She rides the RTD, and I had ridden the RTD school bus home from school, and you have to cross the road to get to the neighborhood. The next morning, I was at my school bus stop, and me and my friends heard sirens. We were trying to stay calm because all of us knew what had happened the day before, and so we were all a little bit scared. And then I got a call from my mom about a minute later saying that another student in BVSD had gotten hit. So on that Friday morning, I went to school, and I was really distracted. And so my mom came and picked me up from school, and we wanted to take some action. And so we made signs to put on the roads that said slow down, and we made these signs to put on these buckets that had flags in them, and they say, take it to make it, and you take up a flag when you're about to cross the road so that cars can see you when you're crossing. The community response in my neighborhood and school was incredible. A bunch of parents stepped up to help and stand at the crosswalk so that students and other people can cross safely. And also, a bunch of students at my school stepped up, and we all made posters and signs and presents and a bunch of things for the 2 students that had gotten hit. The news has also done a really great job of communicating all of the accidents that have happened and making sure that everybody knows what has been happening in the community with the accidents. So I got interviewed, and my mom got interviewed, and a couple other people in my neighborhood got interviewed to help assess what had happened. There has also been a lot of education for people to understand what has been going on. The police have done a really good job at staying at their stations by the crosswalks so that people will get tickets if they're speeding and a bunch of other traffic issues. 5 days after the accident, there were 62 tickets handed out from the police station. And that is a lot of tickets, and it was only on Baseline Road as well, at those 2 crosswalks. So the police have done a great job of taking action as well. Also, 120,000 cars pass from Boulder to Lafayette every day, putting a lot of students and people and cars in risk of being injured or killed. Just this morning, I was on the school bus, and we had to turn around 2 times from 2 different car accidents on the road. And I was late to school, and that was really, really interesting to see. I also wrote an article for my neighborhood magazine. It's called Stroll in Indian Peaks. I write 1 article monthly, and a couple months ago, I chose to write about the crosswalks and the action. In the future, I have a couple things that I think would really help the crosswalks and the safety of people crossing the road, and also cars as they cross too. So community partnerships like you guys and the police stations and cities have all been really, really helpful, and I hope that they will continue. I also think that it'd be very helpful if we could lower the speed limit in the area, because right now it's at 40, and that is a really fast that's really fast for cars to pass through, with 2 different crosswalks in the midst of it. And I think we should at least lower it to 35. The police have been, and I hope will continue to be, very helpful through all of these times. And they have been pulling over people, and I've even seen it outside of my own neighborhood, and that has been really helpful. As well as maybe making the road a single lane so that there would be more traffic so that cars could be going slower. Right now it is 2 lanes. I also think that it'd be helpful to have crossing guards at the crosswalks in the morning and in the afternoon when students are arriving and going to school, because there are so many kids who have to cross the road to get to LMS or Centaurus or the RTD bus stop in the morning and the afternoon. Parents can step up, but they can't step up forever, and I think that to have some people that will do that would be really helpful. There's also been some talk about a traffic light being put at Roser and Baseline, and although that is really great, it probably won't happen for quite some time. And yeah. Thank you so much for listening and for having me. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for your activism, Willow, and for keeping us abreast of this issue as it unfolds. Board members, do you have any questions for our student moment speaker this evening? Kitty.
Yes, do you know, do either of the crosswalks have that thing where you push the button and the lights on the signs flash? Do they even have that?
Yes, they do have that, and with both accidents, both of the students had used them, and the cars still didn't see them coming, and it was, yeah.
Yeah, they're hard to see sometimes during the day.
Yeah, especially because at night, the lights show out more, but they do in the day.
I have one question. Have you been in communication or working at all with Safe Roads to School? Who is at all?
I have not.
I'll just put in a plug for the great work that Safe Routes to School does to help think through challenges around pedestrian and car transportation and access points. And so that would be in your journey another avenue I would explore. And the Safe Routes to School team from BVSD can work with different local governments to help address joint areas of concern. So I'd encourage you to reach out to them as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Willow, and best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Board members, the next item on our agenda this evening is our work session study. Tonight we have one topic, which is the review of our annual comprehensive financial report, otherwise known as the ACFR. I will turn it over to Dr. Anderson to do some introductions.
Thank you, Board President Rajpal. Board members, as you know, this is an annual meeting where we present the annual comprehensive financial report through our partners with Clifton Larson Allen. To introduce our team, I will turn the presentation over to Bill Sutter.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, President Rajpal, members of the board. So we're reviewing the fiscal year 23-24 audit. That's last year. It's the culmination of the fiscal cycle that lasts some 28 months. That's a little foreshadowing for my next presentation, so stay tuned. The audit is really a lot of work to pull this all together, and I just really want to thank staff for all the hard work. And folks might not realize, but that the staff really is everybody in the district, from HR to payroll to the accounting staff to everybody that has a P card and is coding expenditures, and the purchasing staff and the clerical staff at school buildings. So it's really, I'm getting a new microphone. It's really, that's much better. A lot of work for all the accounting that goes on in the school district. This is really just pulling it all together at the end. So on November 20th, the audit committee, which is comprised of board member and treasurer Alex Medler, Board Member Lelania Quinlan Oweda, and community member and longtime Audit Committee member Bob Smart, and staff. We reviewed the audit. It was still in draft form at that time, but we reviewed it in detail and had some great discussion, as we always do with the Audit Committee, but really dove into it for quite some time. At this point, I'll turn it over to Allison Slife, who's a principal with, not a school principal, principal with Clifton Larson Allen, and who is the lead on our audit team. And so we have a PowerPoint presentation, which I'll bring up here in a second, and we'll go through the audit.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for having me here this evening. So we do have a brief presentation just to summarize the results. As was mentioned, we did meet with the Audit Committee in much more detail, so hard to summarize almost 200-page document that you have in front of you in a short meeting, but certainly happy to cover some highlights this evening, as well as certainly answer any questions that the board members might have. And we're almost there. Slideshow there, maybe at the bottom. Yep. There you go, thank you. All right, so we will be covering the fiscal year 2024 year end, as was mentioned. So as of 6/30/24 year end, covering the audit results here. It's not sharing there. That didn't quite work. Hold, please.
Not quite sure why it's not presenting. Tech support.
Back in business, thank you. We'll go through this efficiently here. So just a couple agenda items, but just to recap the overall audit scope, as is every year, we do ultimately issue a report over the financial statements, which you should have in front of you in the green cover that the board members have. This almost 200-page document is the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or ACFR. So that's the ultimate financial statements for the district as a whole for your fiscal year. There's also different aspects that we as external auditors are engaged to perform and report to you all as board members. We are directly engaged with the board to perform the audit. So certain aspects related to communications that we issue a letter to the board, as well as any sort of recommendations, findings, things like that as well. Because the district is a recipient of federal funding, we also conduct what's called a single audit, which is basically an audit of federal funding that the district receives. So the requirement is any government, higher ed, or nonprofit organization that receives $750,000 or more of federal funding has to go through a single audit. So that's a deep dive into certain federal programs related to internal controls and compliance. So that's one of the deliverables, the compliance section that's within the financial statements. So just to summarize the overall results of the audit, so these are just some highlights out of the large document you have in front of you. So we do issue an audit opinion over the financial statements, and we're happy to report that was an unmodified or clean opinion over the financial statements for the district again this year. So congratulations to everyone involved with that. As Bill mentioned, it is a large effort that takes up quite a bit of the year to get us to the point to issue the audit in November. Related to the federal awards, as I mentioned, so we do also conduct an audit over the federal awards. Any of the large programs that the district has to be audited every third year. So this year, we did audit one program, ESSER funding, which is similar to last year. We audited that last year as well. That's COVID-19 related funding that does get audited, and that'll run its course and should be the last year of being audited. But we're happy to report we did have an unmodified opinion over the federal awards as well. So that's a large achievement to be able to achieve both of those from an audit opinion standpoint. In terms of the audit results, more specifically related to the financial statements, within the compliance section at the back of your ACFR document, you have, there is a schedule of findings and question costs. So that's one of the deliverables related to the single audit that has to report any sort of findings. So there's kind of two different levels of findings. One is a material weakness, which would be the most severe type of finding that an entity can receive. A step down from that is what's called a significant deficiency. So that is a type of finding that is reported within this document that does get provided to the federal government at the end of the audit, as well as different stakeholders. So we did have one significant deficiency this year related to the financial statements. This was related to an audit adjustment that was made. It was discussed with the district, and they updated it. It was a capital asset item for about $3.1 million. So the financial statements that you see in front of you are correct. Management agreed to that, and that was taken action. So the financial statements are correct and reflect that adjustment. We did have some other verbal best practice recommendations related to information technology. We do bring in IT auditors from our team at CLA, and those were discussed with management as well, just best practice recommendations. Related to federal awards, we did not have any material weaknesses, and we did not have any significant deficiencies related to the ESSER program, which is great to see, and that's a really positive result as well. So the governance communications letter, that's a letter that does get issued directly to governance, so that you don't necessarily have in the public document, but just some summaries here. Really, it's just kind of overall takeaways from the audit. No sort of major changes, though, really not a lot of updates or anything like that if you were to compare that letter to the prior year letter. We did have what's called uncorrected misstatement, which is basically an item that was identified through the audit that was large enough to bring to your attention, but not any sort of material error. So that item is noted related to kind of accounting specific information of lease standards. So that was similar to the prior year, and it was noted again this year. So that is one of those items where, again, not a material error, but just something to bring to your attention. And then that corrected misstatement I mentioned, that was corrected within the financial statements related to capital assets. No sort of disagreements with management, no sort of issues there in terms of the audit results, which is all positive. And then we do get a signed management representation letter that we do attach to that letter that is signed by management, saying that they let us know of, they gave us the board minutes to review, they gave us all the supporting documentation, they let us know of any litigation, things like that. So we do get that signed before we issue our audit opinion. And just a real high-level overview without going through the large ACFR document. So some of the just highlights here, that independent auditors report, you'll kind of can follow along with the table of contents if you want to. That is our unmodified or clean opinion, so that's towards the front of the financials. The management discussion and analysis, or MD&A, is a good summary of what happened year over year. That is written by management and does have that comparison year over year. So if you're looking for about 15 pages or so summary of the 200-page document, that's a good place to look in terms of financial results. And then the actual financial statements themselves follow after that. Statement of net position, which shows that all-in look for the district, the balance sheet basically for the district, and statement of activities is basically the income statement for that all-in look for the district. And then there's several other pages of financial statements at the fund level, which is kind of more the budget to actual information you're used to seeing at the individual funds, and then a whole lot of pages explaining all the numbers, all the disclosures, things like that are required to be reported. So that's just a real high-level overview of the ACFR document. And then the single audit section, just to touch on that briefly, is that compliance section that's towards the back of that document. That does have our 2 audit opinions related to internal controls over financial reporting and compliance. And then it does have our report over compliance for each major federal program. That schedule of findings and question costs, as well as the schedule of expenditures of federal awards are noted back there as well. So with that, that's kind of the formal presentation, high-level overview. Certainly happy to address any questions or comments that the board members might have, or Bill, if I miss anything, feel free to jump in.
Board members, do you have any questions for Allison? Alex?
Not really a question for Allison, but I did want to give a shout out to Bob Smart on our committee for the expertise and the care that he puts into it. We continue to be very well served by having him as part of the group. And I'm not sure what to report from a long and thorough discussion of these documents that we had last month, but it was good to get to all the little things where the audit reflects things. Didn't have much substance behind them, and was gave me confidence in the overall management of the finances and the transparency into it. So.
Bill?
One final thing, attached to the agenda item is the assurances for financial accreditation. That's a form required by CDE. And just to read a couple of things off it. The school district must submit an assurance form certifying the school district's substantial and good faith compliance with school district budget law, Financial Policies and Procedures Act, the Public School Financial Transparency Act, and Accounting and Reporting. So there's several sections on here that are all indicating that we are in compliance with those pieces of state law. There is one item that's noted that spending did not exceed amounts appropriated for each fund. Justice High School expended over their appropriation. It's a little weird because the charter schools are listed as component units. So while the total charter fund wasn't overspent, the singular school overspent their appropriation. So we've noted that. On the last page, there's a place for myself and the superintendent to sign certifying to the best of our knowledge and belief the assurances are true and correct, and that all information is provided as applicable and is true and correct. And then also that as board president, certifying that the board reviewed the assurances and approved the related responses. So with that, if there is any other questions.
You alluded a little bit to my question with your comments on Justice High. Did you conduct the audit for all of our charter schools this year as you have in the past?
We did, yes. We conducted the audit, and those are all standalone financial statements that get issued as well by each charter school, which are issued before the district as a whole. Mm-hmm.
And then is it only the IT department that you specifically audit, or do you rotate through other departments? You noted the comment on IT, and I know when I was treasurer, you also did an audit of that department, so I was just curious how that process works.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's not necessarily audits of specific departments. IT as a whole has obviously a big role in financial reporting and kind of how financials are put together. So that's a component of control environment, as well as any sort of risks that are identified with data integrity and security, things like that. So that's just part of the understanding the district as a whole and kind of what those controls are over the financial reporting. But as I think Bill mentioned earlier, we meet with members of a lot of different departments. So HR, payroll, grants being probably the largest ones in terms of the expenditures that you all have in activity. So yeah, a lot of folks, transportation, I mean, a lot of different folks are discussed during the audit process as far as just what's happening. Capital assets, being a large spend as well. So a lot of involvement with discussions with those folks as well. So.
Thanks. Board members, any other questions? We appreciate your work on this, and second Alex's comment on Bob Smart. He's been a great partner for many years on that. Well, seeing as Alex?
Can I just invite Bill I think one of the things that's good for our community to be aware of, and this may not be the right place to have this discussion, but as I look at the finances, I continue to see a very decreasing state share from the state finance formula. And I think it's helpful to understand for the community when we start dealing with our budget decisions later throughout the process, where we sort of stand with our finances, both after last year's legislative session, after this upcoming budget, and also our role of just how much we get from the state and feds. Could you comment on that change from this year, last year, the trend on that?
I'll say that's more foreshadowing as well for the budget conversation, because I do have a slide specifically on that that'll really illustrate that very clearly.
Thanks again. Board members, that concludes this discussion, this topic. We will take a very brief adjournment to rearrange the boardroom. Welcome back to the meeting, everyone. The first item on the regular portion of our agenda this evening is the superintendent's report. Dr. Anderson, good evening.
Thank you, Board President Rajpal, board members. A few things to update you all on for the December 10th superintendent's remarks. First, I want to thank everybody who was able to join us for our superintendent's honor roll. That happened prior to this meeting. It was a great way to just continue to recognize all of the amazing things happening in our school districts. I want to thank all of our attendees and their families for coming out and celebrating with us today. So the holiday season, as you know, is underway. If you were out at the Lights of December parade in Boulder this weekend, you may have seen our transportation team going down the parade route. They decked out a BVSD bus with holiday lights, road bikes, and walked with decorated crossing guard stop signs, all to celebrate the many ways BVSD gets kids to school. CW, who's our crosswalk mascot, encourages kids to keep their heads up while crossing the street. He even came along for the festive fun. Transportation staff enjoyed cheers and lots of gratitude from families watching the parade, and we're told that "We love our bus drivers" was heard many, many times along the route from all of our fans that are parents and kids. And so I want to thank the Transportation Department for participating in the Lights of December parade. Board members, this time of year, many of our schools are in the holiday spirit, busy coordinating efforts to benefit community organizations. Right before Thanksgiving, Centaurus High School students, staff, and even some family members gathered to make about 500 heart pillows for breast cancer patients. The pillows are for breast cancer patients. The nonprofit J. Will Pink Village aims to distribute them to every woman going through a mastectomy. The heart shape works perfectly when they're strapping into a seatbelt, helping to prevent the seatbelt from touching their chest area, which is a very painful prospect. Isn't the first time Centaurus students have helped make these pillows. Back in May of 2023, the school helped the organization replace its stock of pillows that had burned down in a storage unit during the Marshall Fire. I want to thanks goes out so much to all of our schools who go the extra mile to help during this time of year, and special thanks to the students at Centaurus. Last week was an emotional time for some of our longtime folks in our community, where people were able to come out and say goodbye to the old Baseline Junior High, Baseline Middle School, and New Vista High School building. After serving the students of BVSD for 71 years, the building is scheduled to be demolished in 2025 after the upcoming opening of the New Vista High School building, which will be following winter break. While the 1953 building is showing its age, many of the past students and staff reminisced fondly while walking through the hallways, visiting classrooms, the gym, and more. It was evident how much their time at the school meant to them. And I think there's many of us that are excited to welcome in the new version, which will be the new high school, the new New Vista High School building. BVSD was recently selected to participate in the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Class program, also known as Champions, leading the advancement of sustainable schools. BVSD is joining about 60 other districts and education agencies in developing strategies to enhance energy efficiency, foster healthier learning environments, and optimize costs. In conjunction with this announcement, BVSD was also invited to be part of the Department of Energy's Better Climate Challenge, which aims to set and reach ambitious portfolio-wide emissions reduction goals. And finally, I want to send a thank you to Broomfield Mayor Guyleen Castriata, City Council member Bruce Leslie, 9 News anchor Kyle Clark, and the many, many other community members and parents who came out recently for Aspen Creek's K-8 Career Day. We know that it takes partnerships like these with our community to make our educational efforts and students successful. I'm very excited for all of the career-related functions and activities that are happening in our elementary and middle schools in alignment with Grad Plus initiative. Board members, that's all I have for my remarks for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Board members, do you have any questions for Dr. Anderson? Seeing as there are none, the next item on our agenda this evening is public participation. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operations of our schools. The board does not endorse the comments of any speaker and reminds all those who speak that you are responsible for your own speech. Speakers will each have 2 minutes to speak. You will see a yellow card when you have 30 seconds remaining and an orange card when you have 10 seconds remaining. If you run out of time or would like to share additional information, you may always email the board. Our first speaker this evening is Knox McCutcheon, who is attending in person. Knox does not appear to be here this evening, so we will move on to our second speaker, Victor Gustafson. And if you could just push the little button with the person on it, and it'll turn your mic on. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Victor, and I'm a junior at Monarch High School, and I'd like to talk about the cell phone policy. I'd like to start by saying that I would like to add my voice to what the other students from the last meeting said about the policy, and that I don't think this harsh of a policy is necessary, nor the right thing to spend resources on. By disallowing phones or personal technology devices, the only people affected will be the people who use their phone responsibly. Those who abuse the phones will always find a way around it and keep using them. For example, to get around in-classroom phone pockets, students can say that they forgot their phone at home or use an extra or old phone. These tactics can easily translate to avoid a building-wide ban. The only people who are actually being punished by this rule are those who don't want to break it, which are those who can manage their phone use already. I also think that the time that will be spent enforcing this policy would be better spent addressing the far more concerning issue, vaping and other substance abuse that is ubiquitous in school buildings, specifically restrooms. These substances are known to be detrimental to students, and all students who are using them are abusing them, whereas that is not necessarily the case with phones. Vaping and substance abuse causes students to follow the rules to feel uncomfortable using the school restrooms. And I'd like to urge you to prioritize addressing the substance abuse issue before considering cell phone restrictions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Neil Fishman.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this. My name is Neil Fishman. My gender pronouns are he and him, and I'm speaking tonight both as myself as well as in my role as president of the board of the Rocky Mountain Equality Action Fund. I want to express my wholehearted support for the Boulder Valley School District's Resolution 24-36 on supporting students and families. This resolution embodies the district's commitment to ensuring that every child, no matter their identity or background, can access education in a safe and supportive environment. The resolution takes a bold stand for equity by addressing the unique and overlapping challenges faced by students from targeted minority groups, including those who are LGBTQ. Intersectionality reminds us that the experiences of discrimination and marginalization often overlap. For instance, LGBTQ students who are also students of color, immigrants, or from diverse religious backgrounds face compounded challenges. This resolution affirms that all students deserve protection, respect, and the ability to thrive without fear of bullying, harassment, or hate. It's critical to recognize the disproportionate impact of bullying and harassment on students from marginalized communities and to ensure these behaviors are not tolerated in our schools. And I am grateful that the resolution also acknowledges the fears and uncertainties facing students and families affected by immigration challenges. No family should have to choose between safety and education. Schools must remain protected spaces for all. Furthermore, the district stands against hate speech, including anti-Semitism and religious harassment as outlined in the resolution, emphasizes its dedication to cultivating a culture of respect and inclusivity. This resolution is a call to action for all of us, educators, students, parents, and community members, to champion equity and stand against all forms of discrimination. I applaud the district for its leadership and for advancing a vision where every student feels seen, supported, and celebrated regardless of their identity or identities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Andrew Brandt.
Good evening, board members, Superintendent Anderson. I'm Andrew Brandt, New Vista's rep to the DAC and the DAC Policy Subcommittee. Speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of the committee. We've been working on updates to policies JRLE and JRS, which govern interrogations and searches of students by law enforcement or school officials on school grounds. You'll receive notes from the subcommittee co-chairs who diligently worked with us to formulate policies that align better with the district's and board's goals for equity and fairness. I won't disparage the DAC's work, but I'm asking you not to approve the changes and to send the policy red line back to the DAC. The subcommittee was under a tight deadline to get these to you by tonight, but late in the process, some committee members and other DAC reps recognized and called attention to serious deficits and problems that remain unaddressed in the policy redline document. There are also new pitfalls created by some last-minute additions. There are more issues than I can even list in 2 minutes. Some of the changes, in my opinion, seriously impact student civil rights and turn school grounds potentially into an anti-constitutional safe space for law enforcement, giving them greater latitude when they operate on school grounds than they would have at a police station, at the expense of the rights and dignity of kids and families. As a result of the time pressure to deliver this to the board by tonight, a plurality opted to send you the red lines and some notes about the hour-long debate that transpired in last week's DAC's meeting. I don't think that's good enough. What is so urgent that there was a rush to finish this right now? When it comes to civil rights, we need to get the whole thing right the first time and not make things worse in a quest for expediency. We live in an era where we hear a lot about imminent threats to school safety, but these remain, fortunately, very rare. However, these policies don't apply only to those rare instances. What is far more likely to happen is that a student suspected of any sort of wrongdoing, with or without evidence, may be subjected to searches or interrogations where a power imbalance leaves a student uninformed of or unable to exercise their civil rights and leaving them humiliated and degraded. And that is not the BVSD that I signed on to be a part of, and I urge you to kick this back to the DAC. Thank you.
Thank you. The remaining speakers this evening are participating virtually, first of which is Scott Blakely. Scott is not present. We'll be moving on to Elliot Fladen.
Hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I am Elliot Fladen. I have 2 non-Jewish children currently at El Dorado K through 8. I attended Kallisman's presentation last night at BVSD regarding her book that has been promised to be placed in each BVSD library. This presentation, which was set up by BVSD's new inclusive teaching director, Florette King, went exactly as expected. Namely, A, he used the term extremist only for a Jew and not a single Arab, in spite of the 2 intifadas on October 7th. B, it placed this blame for the October 7th genocide not on those who broadcast their barbarity live, but instead on Israel. And C, it pushed racist blood libels about Israel engaging in, quote, disproportionate force against those who have promised to murder its civilians. For want of time, I cannot educate those here tonight on why those items were both racist and false. I can only say that given this was an event put on by BVSD's DEI program, that I just should not have to. We do not expect inclusive teaching directors to invite the KKK or the Proud Boys in the name of education. Because for other minorities, we know that the pretext of providing education is not justification to teach racist lies. Yet when Jews are the minority, article after article has been written about DEI programs, not just ignoring their well-documented suffering at the hands of racists, but in fact, DEI programs fanning the flames of hate in this past year. On a charged topic like this, Florette King should have done basic due diligence to make sure the invited speaker would not foster hate or at least coordinate with stakeholders. She did not do that. Similarly, she was at best dismissive of community concerns last night. The lesson for BVSD's Jewish community and allies is that for BVSD's DEI program, unlike other minorities, racism and hate aimed at Jews simply does not count.
Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Elise Mordos.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. I am a resident of Boulder, and I'm here to discuss the same event that Elliot Flayden had just reviewed. I am concerned for numerous reasons, what Elliot mentioned, as long with addition to what I'm going to mention. I learned of this event about 1 hour before it took place and by word of mouth. And I know other parents and concerned Boulderites who also learned about it last minute and made time quickly to attend this due to the important nature of this topic. It was, some of us already knew of this professor because she moderated a Q&A for an event that featured the anti-Israel film Israelism at the Colorado School of Mines last month, which was co-hosted by the anti-Semitic group SDS. So a lot of us were already aware of this professor's anti-Israel agenda, and sure enough, that came through last night. As expected, certain facts were omitted and certain things were presented that were opinions and not actual facts. And some of the issues were definitely addressed during Q&A by attendees who expressed serious concerns about the skewed narrative being shared to teachers who are then supposed to educate their students on this topic. Had the audience not been there, I can imagine that no one would have probably checked some of the facts that were being shared, since I'm guessing most teachers were there to learn about the topic and didn't have a lot of prior knowledge on this issue. Anti-Semitism is already a problem at BVSD, and this event only fans the flames further. I ask that the board investigate the materials of this lecture and see how it's being presented in the classroom, and also see how this topic is being discussed in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Dikla Leon.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I am here to express my serious concerns about the recent Israel-Palestine event yesterday, organized by Flo King, the new DEI director. Her selection of CU Boulder Professor Hillary Kalisman, who is known for her anti-Israel narratives, was highly problematic, and you'd expect her to do her due diligence and really look into who she is inviting. Hillary's presentation displayed clear bias, presenting opinions as facts while omitting critical historical context. This only deepens hostilities towards already struggling Jewish minorities in BVSD schools, like my children, who already, both of them, experienced anti-Semitism at school. I would like to know, is BVSD also planning similar events to address other global conflicts, such as the Sunni Alawite Shiite conflict, maybe Boko Haram Nigeria conflict, or Turkey Kurd conflict? Because if not, I am wondering why this topic is prioritized, and why was it presented in a way that reinforces harmful stereotypes about Jewish students? What was exceptionally disturbing was Flo King's response when parents raised concerns about the bullying of Jewish and Israeli children, students. Instead of addressing the issue, she deflected to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, despite nobody in the room ever mentioned Islamophobia. This word didn't come up in yesterday's conversation. This dismissive response lacked empathy and failed to acknowledge the institutional racism and anti-Semitism Jewish families currently face in our schools. This event.
Thank you. Our final speaker this evening is Jamal Gilmore.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you for your time. I wanted to talk about, this is tough, some harassment and bullying by teachers at my son's school. His school is Angevine Middle School. I've talked to Dan Ryan and everybody inside the administration, and they don't feel that the teacher, Mr. Schlatler, I think that's his name, he's a math science teacher there. He's shaming and stealing dignity from my son. We've wrote the school. We've wrote inside the safe to tell. We did the bullying report. We haven't got any feedback really. I think Rihanna just emailed me a minute ago saying that she's sorry to hear about this and she's known about this. What happened is my son is getting messed with in school. And he's asking people to help him out. No one can help him out. But the minute he sets boundaries with other students, then miraculously the teachers come in and they discipline him without disciplining the other students in the school. So that's the way systemic racism looks like in the school. So for him, it's really hard for him to go to school. He is neurodiverse, and so he does take his steps to help himself out in this, but he does need help from the administration, and no one seems to help him at all. He can't go anywhere. And so my ask is if the board or the superintendent or anybody around could help us with this problem. He's already lost 2 years of his schooling due to bullying in the school, being called gay and nigger and all kinds of colorful language. And so I would like some help from BVSD. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Board members, that concludes public participation for this evening. I want to thank everyone who took the time to show up in person and attend public participation remotely. We are here to listen to your thoughts and experiences. We will now move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is board communication. Board members who would like to begin. Kitty.
Well, first, I want to thank everybody who took the time to come and speak to us, and especially, I can't even remember, I'm sorry, our student's name but Willow, of course, and I always love hearing from our students, and we have some of the best students. They can get up right in front of board members where I would have been shaking in my boots at the same age. In fact, it would never have occurred to me. And thank you for the parents who have commented about last night's presentation. Thank you to the, who else? What else did we speak about? Oh, to the students who've given us their opinion on our cell phone policy. Last weekend, we were at our CASB conference in Colorado Springs, and we did hear an earful from students on their opinions on the cell phone policy, and I'm glad they were able to share that with us. A couple of presentations I went to, I was impressed with. The first one was put on by the Durango School District, and they're doing something along the lines of what we've done with Grad Plus, only it's more intangible skills that they're promoting. It's called Portrait of a Graduate. And they're working on ways to in all of their instruction, teach kids to be empathetic collaborators, resilient risk takers, agile thinkers, creative problem solvers, confident communicators, and courageous leaders. And they are encouraging their students to be active in the community and to work for some of the things that they think are important, sort of like our students do. So that was an excellent program to go to. And I don't know if there's anything else I was going to talk about now. There was I can't remember now the other breakout session I wanted to mention. If I think of it, I'll raise my hand again.
Lelania.
I thought we had a great, some great sessions at CASME, but what comes to mind that I would like to share with our public is that several of us attended a discussion from the superintendent who was in Grand Island, Nebraska, when there was a 2006 immigration raid. And that particular session was very informative about what we potentially face as these new policies may come our way. And so I would encourage anyone with concerns to be sure they're reaching out to our administration so that we can help allay concerns. And then later tonight, we will be discussing a resolution about how we are here to protect our families. So thank you.
Jorge, and then Alex.
I'd also like to thank everybody who spoke tonight. You know, it's been I really appreciate, you know, seeing the student moment earlier, the superintendent's honors roll, and know the great things that we're doing here. But I also, you know, hear the need for us to kind of come together as a community and be inclusive and think about the actions we can take to kind of support each other, right? And that how important it is for us to come together and recognize the differences, but also the needs that we see across the district and the actions that we can take, right, in terms of standing together. I think we need that now more than ever. The CASB meeting last week, I think one of the highlights for me was having breakfast with our student cabinet and youth equity council members to recognize the work that they've put in over the years as a part of this district and the voice that they have, and seeing how engaged they are and proactive they are and the change that they want to make. I think that's a reflection of this community and what our students can do, and I think that's really powerful. And you know, I was in that session that, you know, it was emotional. It was something that, you know, affects communities. And I think as we come together and think about how we stand, not just for ourselves, but for others, I think that's why many of us are here. And so I want to thank our teachers, our educators, our administrators, and our community members who are voicing that right now. And I was at that parade on Saturday evening. I did see the transportation buses. I had no idea we had a mascot. That was awesome. So many of our elementary schools were there. Our middle schools, our high schools, the Manhattan band was there, which is awesome. Just a great energy, great event, and it's a nice. It's nice for this time of year. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a few things. Well, again, like everybody else, I want to thank all the people who spoke tonight, and it was really exciting always to see the superintendent's honor roll. Just really amazing things going on by our students and the adults as well. I wanted to comment on a couple of sessions I went to at CASB. I went to a panel from districts that were actually ahead of us on implementing cell phone policies. And there was some great stuff brought up. And I raised questions and said, hey, we've done it now. What's the most important thing on the communication front, what to do? And generally, the experienced superintendents and school board presidents in that session were emphasizing the things to facilitate social interaction, getting the ping pong tables available, getting the games in the library, things that give kids, the students, things to do with their time. They also talked about the importance of having some discussions amongst the educators about what they're doing differently and how they might change what goes on in the classrooms, in addition to just having less distraction. But I think the primary feedback I got from the most experienced superintendent was, yeah, these are all really important things to talk about, but you should just do this. It makes things a lot better. And their overall affirmation that it's the right way to go. I will say that I've appreciated all the input we've heard from the students and the parents. And one of the recurring things that's come up in the discussion, and I don't think it's an either or, I think it's a yes and, but I have heard from a lot of students complaining about the vaping issues that are still going on. And I know this was a huge priority for the board. In previous years, it's happened at the same time that there was state attention to legal settlements that are going on. And it sounds, as far as the students are concerned, that we haven't cracked that egg yet, and that we still have progress to be done on it. And I'd be curious to find out eventually, maybe add it to our agenda setting or something, and revisit how we're doing on the vaping front. I really don't think it's an either or. I think kids should be comfortable all the time, and we should do what we can to stop practices like that. I also went to a session that was a little mind-blowing for me. I went to 2 sessions in a strand on artificial intelligence. And I will say that from my professional work, I am kind of a skeptic on ed tech, and that I have seen lots of full-time virtual stuff in the charter world where there's just not really a focus on achievement. And I think the sessions I came away with actually thinking I need to, or that we should be deepening our consideration of it, and over time we'll have to put a little more time into it. And it's the part I came away with is it's much more than thinking about plagiarism. And that if we're thinking about it primarily from like, what might a student do wrong with this, we are totally thinking about 3% of it that's really important this year. And in fact, there's much more transformative stuff coming down the pike that is both advantageous and problematic, and that the sort of first thing a parent or someone thinks about is like, oh, this is a new form of plagiarism support, when in fact, it's so much more than that. And it will affect how we do analysis, how we construct teaching, but it will also affect what it means to be literate and what it means about how we communicate with one another and construct our arguments. Like, people will use this the same way we do research on the internet today. And we're thinking about it instead, like how to make sure it doesn't happen. Finally, I really have appreciated the parental input I've gotten from people on the street, as well as emails, as well as this testimony. One thing I'd like to highlight is I got a bunch of emails from Nederland parents who were just supporting their principal. And there have been some issues going on lately that were pretty tricky for families in the community to deal with. And there was an overwhelming support from the community, like, wow, our principal really treated us with respect and worked to address those things. And it's nice on the school board, I will confess, sometimes you get an emphasis on the grievance, and that's important, and I'm glad to receive it. But it's also good when you hear when someone says, well, they really appreciated a Boulder leader who they thought was doing good things for their community. So I wanted to bring that to people's attention. And I guess that's it. Oh, and I really appreciate people speaking and emailing in support of our resolution 2436, and look forward to acting on that.
Beth?
I should have gone earlier. I want to ditto pretty much everything that everyone said tonight. So I too was at CASB, and I think this was the best CASB we've been to, in my estimation. Mostly because some of the sessions felt more relevant and thought-provoking than in the past. I too was at the session around the immigration raids that occurred in Nebraska, and it was, as Jorge and Melania said, it was emotional and difficult to listen to and very thought-provoking. And I walked away with similar feelings as Jorge was saying, how incredibly important it is that we come together right now. You know, we have challenges ahead, and I really, truly do have confidence in this board and in our district leadership to do everything we can to ensure students are safe here and they have a place to belong. I'm glad we have tonight's resolution on the docket, and as Alex said, we really appreciated hearing from all the folks in the community in support of it. So I think we're going to keep things that are important of this nature top of mind, and I just want to add that. And also, hanging out with the students at CASB is always a highlight. We have some incredible kids.
Jason, is there anything you wanted to share this evening?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Sorry for not being there in person. I came home to a sick household and got sick myself. So best that I'm not there. But I was disappointed to miss the honor roll. It's always was my favorite event last year. But anyway, yeah, I think unfortunately going last, most of the CASB stuff was covered. I think I went to a lot of the same sessions. Really enjoyed it, and just getting to spend time with my colleagues on the board. I'm grateful to have colleagues that are smart and passionate and fun. So really enjoyable time, a lot of good takeaways. So again, sorry for not being there in person, but I'm listening in.
CASB, I guess my 2 cents about CASB, I went to a few different sessions for my board members. One was around professional development. I went to a session on higher education. It was interesting to hear a little bit about whether some school districts are doing direct admissions, working with colleges and universities to do direct admits. I thought that was an interesting thing to consider or think about exploring. The other thing that I thought out of that higher ed breakout session that was interesting was ways in which we can improve and increase access to college campuses for our students. And anybody that has kids that are high school age that are thinking about college to understand how predictive analytics is increasingly a part of an application process, and every touch point you have with the university, whether it's visiting it online, going to a table, or showing up in person, those are data points that they're collecting and can impact the application. So I thought thinking through how to help our students get on campuses to determine if they're good fits, if it's the right thing for their future, when they might not be able to figure that out or have the means to do that themselves, is something worth exploring. I went to a session on the upcoming legislation with Susanna Cordova and board members from across the state with a lot of questions on how to process what we're hearing may occur at both the state and national level. That was something that, while not entirely positive, it felt good that a lot of people are trying to tackle the same problems that we are. And there are a lot of unknowns that we are yet to think through and understand. I was able to attend 2 different student sessions, one as a panel and one or a roundtable session and then our breakfast. And through both of those experiences with our students and students from across the state, there were 2 threads that I thought are worth interesting for us to consider and think about, is how to increase student access to the information and the work of the board and to the board itself when we make decisions that impact them. And there are a lot of different models out there, and there are a lot of ways that we could consider approaching this as a board. But from our students, both that attended CASB, the CASB Youth Strand as part of Youth Equity Council, and our student cabinet, really a desire to understand what we do and how they can engage in the work that impacts them. So something to think about there. And then it was great just generally to interact and network with school board members from across the state. There are a lot of school districts that are tackling the same problems we are: graduation requirements, cell phone policies, how to speak to and think about changes to the School Finance Act and averaging and how the budget's going to impact us all, and what does it mean for the Accountability Task Force recommendations. And so it was really great to talk with peers from like-minded school districts, and validating definitely to know that we're really all tackling the same big important issues, and there is a lot to learn from each other. That is all I had. And for those listening, CASB is the Colorado Association of School Boards, and we do attend at least one conference every year to convene and learn from each other. Seeing as I was the last board member to provide comments, we will move on to our information item this evening. We have 3 information items, the first of which is the annual enrollment update.
Good evening, President Rajpal, members of the board, and Dr. Anderson. This Next presentation doesn't really need an introduction. I think Glenn's been providing this presentation, the annual enrollment update, for almost 15 years, I believe. Let's not confuse this presentation with the annual trend report, annual enrollment trend report that we deliver in February that includes 5-year projections. This is really just an update on October count. You will see over the last decade, although the presentation style has changed a little bit, the data points, the trends have stayed the same, so it's easy to compare year after year. And with that, I will turn it over to Glenn Segru, our senior planner. I just noted that we have the incorrect date on this. It should be December 10th, not December 12th, so we will get that corrected and uploaded to board docs. With that, Glenn.
Thank you. To provide a little bit of overview and context for this presentation, this is specifically a snapshot for the 2024 enrollment, and to review how past trends affect our current status with our enrollment. That information is then used for more information in the future and contributes to enrollment projections, which also contributes to the 25-26 budget. And it's also a resource, it's also important in the resource allocation for FTE, facilities, and educational materials. And it's also heavily used by several committees, especially the LRAC and bond committees. So moving on to the overall trends. This year, 2024, we saw about a 0.5 decline in enrollment, about 141 students, which was quite a bit better than we had projected. We had, our expectation was to be around a 1.4% loss, which is 388 students down. So we beat that by a pretty good margin, but we still did decline. That's following a trend since around 2017, a pretty steady decline, especially through the pandemic years. And continue to climb more recently. But more recently, we've been closer to about a 1% loss. So a 0.5% loss is pretty good. A big contributor to this is probably a bolster from recent migrants to the area, which hit much of the Front Range. We thought we might have seen maybe an additional 125 students from recent migrants. Looking at enrollment change as an absolute number, year-over-year change. In this chart, the dark blue lines represent elementary level, with the lightest being the high school and middle in between. We see, as we've been seeing over the years, elementary has really been driving a lot of the declines as that moves into the middle school. And now we see high school in more recent years in decline as well. In 2024, we still see elementary in decline, but not as bad as we've seen in recent years. Also, high school is probably pretty consistent with recent years, a little bit better, but we do see another surprising year of growth at middle school. The one explanation that comes to mind is we may still be seeing pandemic kids who enrolled in elementary programs outside the district that are coming in at that transitional level. Looking at this in terms of grade distribution and how the different grade levels and populations in those grade levels affect overall enrollment. When you look at this chart, you can see the grade levels along the bottom, K through 12. Each grade level has the top of the line in dark is the highest that grade level has been in the last 10 years. The line with the lower, with the lighter blue is the lowest that enrollment has been in the last 10 years. The white squares are where we are at this year, and the little triangles are where we were projected. And what really stands out is that kindergarten class, which was about 100 bigger than what we had expected. So a definite pop at kindergarten, and also one of the biggest classes since the pandemic as well. But not just kindergarten, all of the transitional levels did beat expectation, and were a little higher than what a lot of the past trends that we've been seeing would tell us they would be. Otherwise, we see the pattern that we've been seeing over the years with very, very small classes through elementary and middle school, and moving into high school. When we look at change on a regional level and K-12 students where they live, based on where they live, not where they go to school, we see this chart breaks down Boulder in the dark bars and the eastern communities in the lighter bars. We see that starting in 2018 or so, we see Boulder starting those declining trends and really driving a lot of the decline in the district. And through the pandemic, much of the eastern part of the district was in decline as well. This year, Boulder is fairly on trend in terms of its amount of decline, but we saw a pretty good bump in the eastern part of the district. That was not necessarily unexpected. The eastern part of the district did have quite a bit of housing that was expected to come online, and it has in this last year. So Parkdale, being the biggest one, has added about over 400 units in about the last 18 months. So that's probably the major contributor to that bump this year. Looking at a similar chart, refined a little bit to the elementary level and showing more community differences. Again, we see that elementary losses in Boulder starting as far back as 2016 and continuing through this year, and Boulder still showing fairly consistent losses again this year. We do see bumps a little bit in Broomfield and the mountains in 2024, but we do see, and we also see the Lafayette Erie area. You can reflect in that K-5 growth that I mentioned earlier, probably from new housing, and also Louisville and Superior showing similar declines they've seen in the past, although Louisville seemed to have a little bit less decline this year than in the past. And looking at other factors in districts, enrollment, migration out of district, and births being a few. This is a revision of a chart we've shown in the past. In the past, we've shown only the dark bars, which are out-of-district students coming into the district. This year, we branched out to use CDE data, which also shows us students leaving the district as well. The one difference with this is it also includes PK, which isn't in most of my charts. I do not include PK. And it does skew things a little bit because PK, in recent years in particular with universal coverage, we've seen an increase. So the numbers do skew a little bit, but the overall trends of new out-of-district students is generally the same. The other part on this is the light blue lines on the bottom. That's what the CDE does offer. It's not data that we have in-house, and that is the number of students leaving out to other districts. And we can see actual growth in that number from 2014 up until about the pandemic, and a leveling off since then. Since CDE doesn't produce their data until January, the last bar, 2024, is our estimate of CDE numbers, which are our out-of-district kids plus our preschoolers. We'll have to wait till January to see what the outs look like. Net migration is an important factor in enrollment. This is our chart where we try to get at that as best we can. It measures new and leaving resident students to the district. The top line in green, measuring new students that come into the district, either moving to it or enrolling from private schools or home schools. The line below that in kind of the reddish purple are the students that are leaving BVSD. And the gains or difference that we see is that line with the arrows in between. That would be the net difference. So the little bigger that net difference line, the more students we gain from this kind of net migration. This year, we're seeing very large gains, 580, again, probably a function of some of the recent migrant students in the area that I mentioned before. But it doesn't explain the entire difference. 580 is pretty large. Last year was a pretty good gain as well at 380. Some of the best numbers we've seen since even before the pandemic. and this year was even stronger. So that's another good sign for the district in our outlook going into the future. Births, another key trend that we look at, of course, births hopefully turn to kindergartners later, so it's an important thing to monitor and as a baseline to enrollment overall. Declining births is nothing new to BVSD. Overall decline for the district since 1999, and that's continued. We can see in this chart, it does differ regionally somewhat. The top line in gray is the eastern part of the district. We can see a much more level line, although some slight decline with that line and much more drastic birth declines in Boulder itself. Although since 2019, we do see a bit of a leveling in Boulder as well. And of course, we discussed this over the last year or so, total fertility rates have been going down steadily. And again, we see in 2020 that has happened again. That means women are having fewer children or fewer kids and or not having kids at all. And what births, the correlation of births to kindergartners looks like in BVSD is shown here. The dark blue line are the resident kindergartners that we've had year over year. The gray line on top of that are the corresponding births that occurred roughly 5 to 6 years before that. So we can see over the years there's been a fairly consistent trend between those two lines, with a few exceptions, especially the pandemic. The thing that we've been watching more recently has been the previous 2 years where that ratio between the number of births and the number of resident kindergartners that we see had been declining in recent years. We're usually running between 90 and 95%, and we were getting into the 80s. This year, we did see a little bit of a rebound in that number, much more to what we've seen in previous numbers. So that's also another good sign in the long run. In summary, enrollment declines this year have been better than in recent years. We had a lot, although we did go down 141 kids, or 0.5%. We did beat our expectation by over two times that. Elementary and high levels saw declines in 2024, but middle school saw a second year of surprising gains. And kindergarten at 1609 was the largest that we've seen since the pandemic. We saw stronger resident student gains at middle school, which may have come from students returning, re-entering the system after the pandemic. Out-of-district contributions to enrollment in 2024 was close to last year's historic high. Boulder, Louisville, and Superior are largely driving enrollment declines, where Lafayette and Erie actually showed some modest growth in 2024. Births showing signs of leveling off after a period of steep declines, especially in Boulder, and we are seeing stronger student net migrations also in 2024. With that, I can open up to questions.
Beth? Thanks for that presentation. Sounds like a lot of good news. Tell us a little bit more about Parkdale. Are we seeing the majority of the gains there, or are we anticipating more coming? The number of houses purchased, that sort of thing.
It seems to be moving. They seem to be selling briskly. There's 3 different builders there, and they're all nationals, so they're pretty good at providing incentives and bringing people into the houses. So for 400 plus homes in 18 months is very robust.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand slide 11, which looks like great news on the leaving and coming residents. This is adjusted for kindergartners not going 12th graders, what does that mean? So it's not in,
so it doesn't
include
all
them.
Kindergartners are new, and all 12th graders are leaving, right? So you've got to take those 2 groups out. Yeah.
So what's left here are people in the other grades who started out in BVSD schools but left, or kids in those school age that are entering other than through the beginning of kindergarten?
It really just looks at last year's kids and seeing which students were gained since last October, and then which students were lost since last October. So it's just a simple point-to-point comparison.
Board members, any other questions for Glenn? It was a very thorough presentation, Glenn.
Thanks.
Not a lot of questions from the board. I will put a plug that there are bright futures ahead in BVSD, and that open enrollment window is open and will be open until January 8th. So as you're thinking about 8 days left till winter break, by the 8th of January, if you want to be with us, please be sure to apply. Kitty?
Yes, I just want to make sure I understand on slide 12 where it says the total fertility rate fell from 1.4 to 1.0. So does that mean between 2010 and 2020? Okay.
Yes.
How, is that a lot? Is that, I mean, what do we?
It's been amazing since 1990. We've dropped almost perfectly 0.4 kids, so to speak, every 10 years. So from a lot of demographers would say 2.3 is what you need to sustain a community without in-migration. So we're well below that level and have been getting lower and lower.
Alex?
On that point, how is the overall population of the school district doing? Are we continuing to?
We're the overall population has been increasing, just not in the areas where we see a lot of kids. So of course we see a lot of young adults, and also we're seeing the 60+ portion of our population gaining quite a bit too.
Dr. Anderson?
First of all, I want to thank Glenn for being such an expert and for 15 years providing us this information. Thank you, Glenn. If you could go to slide 6, I want to point out a couple of things. I really just want to take this opportunity to thank all of our schools, all of our school leaders, all of our teachers for continuing to provide just an amazing opportunity for students. As you can see here with kindergarten, 6th grade, and 9th grade, those are the transition years that we've really been focusing on at the BVSD as the place to be showcase. And to Glenn's point, we certainly had an influx of migrant students, but it does not account for all of the students that we were able to either retain or gain. And while I couldn't tell you X number of parents who went to this event then enrolled in the school district, I think it's between the showcase, between the improved efforts, I think, in our school-based events. It's a mentality, I think, that we're embracing here in our school district to make sure that we serve each and every kid in our community, and we open our doors where space allows for folks outside of our community that are part of our community in a different way, to Nicole's point, that work here or plan to be here at some point. And so pretty significant news, board members, that we are slowing down declining enrollment. And if you were to tell me 2 years ago that that's where we would be at in December of 2024, that we would have beat projections and have begun to slow down declining enrollment based on the things that we've been taking on, I'd be thrilled. And so I don't want to let this good news go past us without celebrating all of the work that has happened over the course of the past 2 years to really begin to adjust to our enrollment situation and know and understand that I think the future is bright in regards to not only with our new enrollment preferences, but new opportunities at schools that for a long time, maybe there weren't opportunities for folks to open enroll. And so just very excited that one of the biggest challenges we're taking on, which is declining enrollment, we're seeing some progress based on, I think, the collective efforts of a lot of things.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Our next information item this evening is the 25-26 budget development process and the 25-26 budget outlook. Bill Sutter will be presenting this information.
Thank you, President Rajpal, members of the board, Dr. Anderson. So we have our first step in the budget development cycle for the 25-26 fiscal year. So we'll start with the fiscal cycle. So as I mentioned in the audit update, as a little foreshadowing, the 28-ish month fiscal cycle of budget development, budget implementation, budget revision, and then the financial audit. So we've got a brief 2-minute video that highlights, we showed this about 1.5 years ago, but this really helps kind of show the cycle for the community and some additional excellent narration by our Chief Communications Officer, Randy. Oh, we don't have any sound. Do I need to unmute or?
Here in the Boulder Valley School District, we take our responsibility as stewards of taxpayer dollars very seriously. We pride ourselves not only on our careful management of the funds that you've trusted us with for our students, but also being transparent throughout the process. Beyond being honored by national and international experts in the area, BVSD is committed to ensuring that our community understands our fiscal process so that you can follow it and participate. It's important to know that from start to finish, the fiscal cycle is about 28 months and includes first defining our budget process and planned milestones, then regularly checking in on the fiscal lay of the land. Opportunities are given for staff members, families, and community members to contribute ideas. District leadership then considers the alignment of these suggestions to the district's strategic plan and prioritizes things accordingly as the budget is created. It is then presented to the Board of Education for discussion and potential editing. Once board members approve the budget, BVSD staff works to implement it. Along the way, as we will discuss in more depth in a moment, there are factors which might alter our course, which is why we regularly come back and update the board, and ultimately revise the budget midway so that it reflects the conditions on the ground. As the fiscal year ends, our team ensures that everything that happened is properly recorded. That report is then audited by an independent outside organization, and they report back to the Board of Education about how we did, covering whether we followed best practices, complied with state and federal law, and accurately reported the information, ensuring that we stay on the straight and narrow. As we go through this process, it can get a bit complicated because, as we mentioned, the entire process stretches over 28 months. It is common that our business services team is working to establish next year's budget while implementing this year's plan and reviewing what happened during the last fiscal year. Ultimately, each cycle has the same events. What does change from year to year are the factors that may impact our budget. Every year we base our flight plan on the best information we can gather and try to forecast what might be ahead. Challenges certainly can emerge along the way. With $1 billion budget, we can adjust and still get to our intended destination. But in the rare event of a situation in which we need to significantly change course, we are in constant communication with our Board of Education and community so that everyone is aware and can provide feedback and be part of the solution. Here in the Boulder Valley School District, we are proud of our tradition of strong financial stewardship.
So a brief overview of this fiscal cycle. As was mentioned, this last year, this year, next year conversation can get a little confusing sometimes. So we've done some color coding, and I'll note this as we go through the presentation. But we just reviewed last year with the audit. For this year, we have the state revenue forecast and revised budget, and then next year, budget development conversation we'll have in a minute. So I'll point that out as we move along. So the timeline and milestones, we've been reviewing this process for about a decade now. It helps illustrate the points in the process where we get information, comes into the district and staff. We get feedback from the board, we get input from the community, and then the board takes action. So I've gone through this in more detail in the past. The conceptual ideas behind it haven't changed, so I'm going to keep this a little slimmed down version. But from September to June really is all the opportunity for feedback and input for the community and the stakeholders, public comment at board meetings. There's plenty of opportunity for the community to give that feedback. We have our data inputs, things like state revenue forecasts, governor's budget, the legislative session, the October count that we just got the update on, consumer price index, which drives, or inflation, which drives funding, as well as those enrollment projections, district quarterly financial statements, and then we have action items like the release of staffing, notifications to staff, and adopting the budget. The releasing of staffing, which is noted there in the February to April timeframe in that gray bar, that's committing approximately 90% of the general operating fund. So it's a fairly significant action that gets taken and is a commitment of the budget as we move forward. So note the color coding up in the corner there. So we have hopefully it's shown up, yep. Next year is identified, so this is the conversation for the next year budget development. So the takeaway on this is the budget development process spans many months, and there are plenty of opportunities to provide input, and relevant data and information comes to us throughout the process. So some of it's coming to us right now. The audit does provide us information for budget development, enrollment count, and then those state financial outlooks. So as we move into the September state revenue forecast, which is the most current one that we have available, although there's another one, the December forecast, they come out quarterly, is coming at the end of next week. So again, note the color coding up in the corner there. The green is this year, so this is the current year September state revenue forecast. And it's only about 14% of the data that comes into the state. So this is information, the revenue collections, not property taxes, but income taxes and sales taxes that are coming into the state. So it's a very small portion of what they're projecting on. But the indications are a slowing economy, and there's been some downward revisions in their projections. So moving into next year, while it's still the current year revenue forecast, the governor's budget is built at this time of year, right? It comes out 1st of November. And it's built on that projection that has pretty limited information. When we get the December forecast, there's almost 3 times as much information and data for that forecast that helps inform where the legislative session starts. And then when you get to the March forecast, which is what the state is setting the next year's budget on, it's much more than we have right now, but it's still only 62% or just above half of the annual data. So again, the takeaway on this is that both the district and the state are building budgets with projections. So they're imperfect data, incomplete data, and the picture becomes more clear as we move along, but we do have to make those educated guesses, we'll say, to project the budget, project student count, build the budget, pass the budget, implement the budget, and then make those revisions as we get into the next fiscal year. So for the revenue forecast in the current year, the state general fund has a downward revision for revenue. The investment income, insurance premium, taxes came in lower than projected, so that's why they're reducing their forecast. Inflation is projected in that September forecast at 2.7%, which was up from the June forecast of 2.5%. But it's actually likely to decline as we get into the December forecast and what is the final number for the calendar year 2024, which is the number that drives the fiscal year 25-26. So it's in arrears is the funding increase for the following year. So for the economy, normalizing wages, so not as much growth in wages, in income and associated retail demand is why those lower income tax and sales tax revenues have been projected downward. Continuing in the current year, so you can see the declining general fund revenue at the state, both in last year, so it was steady for 22 and 23, declined in 24, further decline in 25, which is the current fiscal year, and then starting to climb back. So again, this is constraining the state's budget when those revenues are declining. So again, the takeaway, total general fund, state general fund revenue is declining, while at the same time there are statutory increases for budget areas, including K-12, that make it very difficult for the state to fund new programs or move towards fully funding K-12 to meet educational expectations and mandates. So as we move into budget development, this is just a reminder, this is the new look and layout of the All Together for All Students strategic plan. This is just a reminder for the public that we have a phenomenal strategic plan that is producing great results, and that the strategic plan is the budget plan, and it will drive those conversations in the coming months as we begin to build the budget and bring it forward for adoption. So as we move into the 25-26 budget outlook and challenges, so again, note to color coding up there. For next year, the governor's 25-26 K-12 budget request had 2.5 inflation or consumer price index funding increase on base student funding. Statewide enrollment decline, so this is just the raw number of students in the state declining by about 0.5% or about twice the percentage for the, about half, I would say, that Boulder is about twice what the state average is. $115 million increase in general fund support for K-12 schools. This increases the state average per pupil funding by about $299. There's a $13.5 million increase for categorical programs. So categorical programs are required to be increased by inflation as part of Amendment 23 that was passed in 2000 by the voters. So there's a requirement, again, some of that required statutory increase. These are things for transportation, special education, gifted and talented education, and career and technical education. So they're reimbursements to the district for current spending. And the governor's budget also maintains the budget stabilization factor at 0. Now for what I would say are the stunning components of the proposal. Just 7 months ago, and after 2 years of processing with the legislature, the rug was pulled out from under school districts by eliminating averaging, reducing and extending the rollout of the new School Finance Act. This was done with no public input and no public processing. And so it was really disappointing to see this come out from the governor. And really it was done to avoid at all costs re-implementing the budget stabilization factor. This really makes for good talking points at press conferences, but is really bad for schools. So the takeaway on this, by adjusting for the inflation and eliminating averaging for declining enrollment school districts, implementing the new School Finance Act, maintaining the budget stabilization factor at 0, the state is increasing per pupil funding by a greater percentage than total funding. So it's kind of basic math. When you reduce the denominator, total student count, you drive up the average funding at a greater percentage than total funding is increasing.
Hey, Bill, I'm going to need you to back that thing up here. And I'm going to have to talk about this slide here for a moment. You know, board members, and just for the public that's watching, I just want to be incredibly clear that averaging, a long-standing practice in Colorado on how students are counted, how we've projected and built our budgets for how long, Bill? Ever. And then in November, right before a session, to change the way you count students so you don't have to reestablish a budget stabilization factor is what this looks like. It's not what it looks like. It is what it is. We know that there are going to be budget challenges and pressures. We know that within the special session, to avoid having 50 and 108 be on the ballot in November. And as a reminder for the public, those were two ballot initiatives that would have significantly reduced the amount of tax dollars the state would be able to collect. As opposed to letting those go to the voters, there was a special session. This is something that as a board we supported, but those dollars came out of, they're contributing to this. But you know, as another reminder, as we were pushing back against 1448 last year, what is it we told everybody? You're not going to have the money. And they don't have the money. But if you change the way that you count kids and say, well, this is a better way to count kids, it's actually a way, as Bill described, to try to get to the money so you don't have to reintroduce the budget stabilization factor. And I would say that this is the governor's initial budget, and Bill, I'm sure you're going to talk about the joint budget. Maybe you are going to talk about the JBC. They've been talking in regards to this. I think that there's a lot of folks in our corner to not allow averaging to be eliminated. But I will tell you, up and down the Front Range, and as we were at CASB and speaking with superintendents, there are a lot of concern around the chaos that this will bring to school districts across the Front Range. So Bill, you were cooking. I know I hate to stop when you're on such a roll with the budget presentation, but I think it's just really important to stop and let folks know that, A, we saw some of this coming. We were worried about some of this when we were fighting against 1448. Board members, as you can remember, that was a long, drawn-out fight. We were unsuccessful in stopping that from passing. And some of the things we were worried about are now coming true. And so in any event, this will be a busy legislative session as we engage our delegation and share with them the realities of what will happen if this governor's budget pushes forward. And I believe, Bill, you're going to get into that a little bit. So some more foreshadowing for you as you move on with the budget presentation.
And just a quick reminder, is it 100 students is roughly $1 million? Is that or how many, if we're looking at a drop in 574's, it's 574 FTE or student count?
That's 574 FTE of students, so full-time equivalents.
Of students, and what does that translate to typically in an average, on a dollar basis?
$6.5 million-ish.
Thanks.
That is the entire 5-year averaging. Just to note that the new School Finance Act, part of that negotiation that went on last spring, dropped it from 5 years to 4 years. So this is the cumulative effect of going from 5 years averaging, which we're in right now, to 0 years averaging, which is the proposal by the governor. Just to note a couple other things, extending the implementation of it. So it was originally rolled out to be implemented over 6 years with about 18% per year of the new money, $550-ish million of additional new money in order to fund that new School Finance Act. So it extended it to 7 years, but then also significantly reduced the first year implementation from 18% of the new funding down to 10%, with a promise of it'll be somewhere between 10 and 20% per year for the additional years of rollout, which really is just an indication that there probably won't be the money to roll out it in the future as well. So again, just some significant changes that were made as all of the negotiations that were happening during the legislative process last year. To note, I don't have a particular slide on the JBC presentation that was done for School Finance Act, or for School Finance last week, but members of the JBC made some comments around the disappointing nature of making such significant changes to the Finance Act without that public process that occurred during the legislative session. There were requests for numerous different scenarios. What would it be to, or what would it cost, what would it take in funding to just continue the current School Finance Act? Which was the language that was put into the legislation last year of if the money doesn't exist, if the revenues aren't coming in high enough, the trigger language it's called, to make it not be implemented. So instead of not implementing it, they just made the changes to it so that it both could be implemented and also have that claim that per pupil funding is going up, funding students where they are, eliminating phantom students, comments of districts just need to close schools faster. I would hope the governor would show up to any community meeting and tell the community that they should just close their school faster because that's the message that's coming along when it takes, as we have experienced, a lot of processing with the community to understand what's happening and make different choices or try things differently to either slow down or reverse the effects of some of that declining enrollment. So schools aren't storefronts. They're not a Dollar General. You don't open them in 6 months and close them 6 months later. They're the heart of a community, and so to be as callous to suggest that schools should just be closed faster is pretty disingenuous in my opinion. Moving right along. So as we move forward, looking at the budget pressures for next year, right-sizing staffing. We have staff currently on one-time resources. So these are staff that we maintain as we do our staffing process. We make the projections, we staff schools, and if students don't come in quite as projected, and we're talking, 2, 3, 5 students in a class, that could mean that the class is smaller than would be otherwise staffed, but we don't go in and move students around and move teachers around at the beginning of the school year. We have historically not done that. It can be disruptive to the learning environment, so we maintain those staff on one-time dollars and make the adjustment in the following year when we have new enrollment projections and new visibility into where students are. So making those adjustments for the current year staff that we have that need to be moved around. And then, our staffing anomalies with the small schools, those are other challenges that exist when you have, we don't have any 5, 6, 7 round elementary schools. It's much easier to sort of smooth the staffing within a school. So when you have really small schools with 1, 2, and 3 rounds, it gets a little harder to do that. So also resetting staffing for declining enrollment, just as we're projecting the student decline for next year. It's just a resetting of all those staffing formulas. And then funding and resources focused on continuation of current strategic plan initiatives, so maintaining as much as we have. So this slide essentially sort of repeats some of that information, but staffing, enrollment, and inflation are the sort of trifecta of what we're facing going into next year's budget. So the School Finance Act changes, I think I elaborated on that plenty, but the projected net increase in School Finance Act funding for the district is 0.8%, yet the projected per pupil funding increase is 3%, right? So that's where you change the denominator, and all of a sudden the per pupil increase gets much larger and is a great talking point. But we need to face the reality that the total school funding, School Finance Act funding for the district is not going up by as much of a percent. Then the tax implications, the local property tax implications, foreshadowing on the state share piece. So as local property tax increases, the state support declines, it's not a windfall of funding. So we created this graphic a couple of years ago to help illustrate that as the total program funding for the School Finance Act is developed, it's made up of local share, which is the light blue, and the state share, which is the orange. And so we have the BS factor, the budget stabilization factor funding void down there in the corner, because that's, we'll say, a balloon that is right now at 0, but can grow if the state is facing a shortfall and needs to balance its budget on the backs of schools. It's an easy mechanism to be able to do that. I think there, as I said, will be other choices made perhaps to still reduce funding to K-12, but not make it as visible as the budget stabilization factor was, because it's a reminder to the state of them not funding K-12 education in an appropriate manner. So as those state sources flow back to the state budget, they get to be repurposed to other needs within the state. So the budget stabilization factor is currently proposed to be 0, and if it comes back, it's an option, and some of my colleagues and I would suggest that it's an appropriate way to transparently reduce funding to K-12 in the need that the state, we have the constraint of Tabor that really doesn't allow the state to do some things. There are some things that they could and should be doing in some cases, but it's a real transparent way to show that debt that is owed to school districts. The governor was pretty quick to comment. I think one of the priorities listed in his budget letter, included within his presentation to the legislature, was that a priority was fully funding K-12 education. And so we'll see when the adequacy study comes out here fairly soon just how close we are to fully funding K-12 education. So this graph clearly illustrates what happens when local property tax increases and the state share declines. So even though we had total funding increases, those funding increases were largely or entirely supported by the local property tax increases. So this is not necessarily unique to Boulder, but with declining enrollment and very strong property values, it's the phenomenon that we're in where we're getting fairly close to being fully funded locally. There are some other constraints in here, so to be fully funded, there's maybe an oil and gas district. Typically, they're very small districts. Aspen, I believe, is fully funded locally. You have to fund all the categorical reimbursements and the entire School Finance Act. So we're a little ways away, but a couple of reassessment cycles and a strong economy, we could see ourselves being fully funded locally. The whole point of this is that there are not windfalls of dollars to the district when those local property taxes go up because of reassessment cycles, and it allows the state to repurpose those state dollars to other purposes. So this is really the crux of where we are, where we have a expectation imbalance just to provide what would be our historic compensation expectations of a cost of living increase at that rate of inflation, movement on salary schedules, a health and dental benefit increase of 5%, which is very low. Anybody who's in tune to health and dental benefits, they're usually, as we experienced last year, double-digit increases. We had to really increase the deductibles and change some of the benefit structure in order to maintain the funding for it. But on the flip side, the revenue expectations is under $2 million in the governor's proposal in the School Finance Act, including our 25% override. So it's a $12-ish million gap at this point. This is, again, based on the governor's proposal. It is not very popular in a lot of arenas. So we'll see if the legislature is willing to push back against the governor that hasn't materialized in some of the past sessions when there have been some other not-so-great ideas come forward. But we're just at the start of this. This is projecting additional revenue next year, so it's not a decrease in revenue overall for the district. It's just a very, 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 very small increase. So next steps in our budget development. So we'll have the second quarter state revenue forecast coming out next week. That'll help inform where we are, if they've updated their inflation estimates, as well as some of their projections for revenues with that softening economy. We have the state supplemental budget coming in January and February. They'll be updating it for the student count from October. We have our revised budget study and action in January. We have our draft strategic financial plan in mid-January, so that's another bite at some of the economic projections. Yesterday, the CU Leeds School of Business puts out their economic forecast for the next calendar year, so 2025, the 60th annual economic forecast, I will add. So we'll include some of that updates in the draft strategic financial plan, along with some of the assumptions that will be generated. And then we have our mid-year analysis in early February, so that's expenses compared to budget, so that's our own sort of revenue and expense projection for the district. How are we doing through the first 2 quarters of the year? And then in April, early April, the preliminary budget for next year. So with that, the end. Back to slide
26, Bill. Board members, as we were discussing 1448 last year, I made a comment that, if this thing passes, we need to be ready for a new reality. This reality is even a worse projection than that comment would have intended. It's important, as Bill and I worked on this budget presentation, it's important for us to be very honest with people, honest with our community, honest with our employees, honest with everyone. This is a $12 million gap between, and this would include no new programming, no new expenditures, we're going to have potentially additional needs. Everything is we're going to have to take away to do new. It is just a very different reality than I think our district has become accustomed to. Not insurmountable. We will deliver a balanced budget, but I just think that there are going to be things that people feel like they can't live without, and they're going to have to live without them. That's the nature of balancing budgets. So, I think that we've done as much as we can to try to prevent this from happening, whether it's the focus on enrollment, whether it's the focus on advocacy. Board members, you know how much time and effort and energy we poured into trying to hold off 1448. We'll do the same thing with this budget. Just know and understand that. But it's just really important that we're incredibly clear that if things don't significantly change, that we're going to have to look at doing business differently in a lot of different ways in our district to be able to build and deliver a balanced budget, which we have an obligation to our taxpayers. I have an obligation to this board, to this district, to this community to make sure that we live within our means. So I know Bill, the 27 slides is a lot of slides, and I know Bill went through some pretty painstaking detail on some of these issues. And as we went through this, I just think it's really, really important. If folks should be paying attention to what's going on. And I want to thank Bill for his leadership and for this presentation, but I just needed to come back to this slide to just stop to make the point that we are moving forward in a new reality that is going to significantly change the ways that we've done business in the past, with the understanding that our needs for our kids are continuing to grow.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Anderson, and it speaks a bit to what I shared with the District Accountability Committee when they convened earlier this month to discuss their draft recommendations for a budget, that adding things is not a reality at this point, and to think about the trade-offs very clearly. So thank you for articulating that as well. Board members, we will be spending a lot of time thinking about and discussing this budget, as Bill showed. And we will undoubtedly be hearing questions and concerns from our community about the contents of all of these budget discussions. And so I really want to make sure all of us have a pretty clear understanding and can speak to how our budget process works and next steps. And so I would welcome any questions that you have for Bill or for Dr. Anderson on this presentation, and to make sure that we get questions answered on how to speak to our budget in the months ahead. Kitty.
Thank you for that lovely news. Do we have, and by we I mean you, have any idea what this, especially on slide, I just accidentally made my screen smaller, 26, what that would be like if the averaging were not taken away?
So there were 3 changes done to the new School Finance Act in the governor's proposal. Extending the implementation, cutting the first year implementation, and eliminating 4 things. Eliminating the hold harmless, there's a 0.5% increase that was eliminated, as well as eliminating the averaging. So all 4 of those things together is at least $5 million. So it would not have closed the gap entirely, but it would have significantly reduced it for sure. So yeah.
And the other thing I just wanted to say is I used to talk about the state balancing the budget on the backs of schools. Now I talk about the state balancing the budget on the backs of children, because that's what we're really doing. And in my opinion, it's important when we talk about it that we talk about it that way, so the community understands that this is something that will directly harm children. Sure, it will be a problem for employees, especially if we have to reduce our force. But the biggest impact will be on children.
Alex?
Sort of a policy question. Is the change in the averaging still require a statutory change by the legislature, and the governor's proposing that they make that change? Or is that something they have the authority to make without voting in the legislature to make it happen?
No, it's currently in the School Finance Act, just as all of the calculations that go into it. So it would have to be a statutory change.
There would have to be or wouldn't have to be? Sorry.
Would have to
Would
be.
have to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the sort of thing we can work with our delegation on to try to make not happen. Right. Another question. 5% health dental increase, how realistic is that in the last 3 or 4 years trend data on health and data increases?
So that is the current language that's in the contracts around 2 times inflation up to a maximum of 5%. So that's kind of the benchmark that's in there. We have the benefits committee went through a long process this fall to come together, and we're really digging in and moving forward on what are our options from the benefit mix, the plan designs, all of that.
And this is perhaps a question for Dr. Anderson, but I was struck inside baseball, coming out of the CASB delegate assembly, like failing to be able to take a position on the accountability issues before the state was indicative of, whether groups like CASB are up to the task of like advocating these complicated things. I'm curious what you think the status is of our fellow districts of similar size along the Front Range, other ones affected by this, and who we have to work with to sort of build the coalition of people that want to do the things we want to do, because I'm not sure I expect CASB or CASE to come through.
I think that's a fair assessment. We're gonna definitely have to I think work through our lobbyists to look at those districts that are in similar situations around averaging. The Front Range is where we serve 70% of the students in the state, and that's where most of the decline is. So it will be impacting the majority of districts across the Front Range. Places like 27J and St. Vrain, who maybe would actually be benefactors of something like this, because if you're increasing, you don't. If you're averaging and you lose a kid and it's spread over 5 years, you feel 0.2 of the impact. If you're gaining, you feel 0.2 of the impact, right? And so there's a lot more school districts that will be that this would hit. And some things that we spoke at CASB, had an opportunity as part of our Front Range Superintendents Group to talk with state board members, the commissioner, around a couple of big ideas around just the volatility without averaging that you have to prepare for as a district. Like, say, for example, because of new federal immigration policy, a district loses 500 to 600 kids, which is that is a reality that I think districts are thinking about. I mean, you just heard Glenn present around, the influx of migrant students and how that helped boost our numbers, right? It can go the same way. And so, this idea of how when I say that we have to change the way we do business, it fundamentally changes the way we do business, right? Schools are used to getting, their allocations at a certain timeline. Parents are used to knowing who their teacher's going to be at a certain time, or how many teachers there's going to be. To the extent that you create this volatility, we'll have to reflect on lots of our practices to make sure that we are living within our means. And what does that mean? People are already pushing us to hire earlier. Tell us, give us that FTE earlier so we can get ahead of the hiring processes, or, but without averaging and without knowing, in an environment where people can pick up and go to any school that has room in the state. Like there's this other set of conditions at Colorado that make this completely different than other places I've worked, where the ability for folks to pick up and go to another school beyond their neighborhood school is vastly different. It creates it's a complicated set of problems that we'll be looking to solve. So you can trust me, that our community can trust me to fight for our school district, to fight for every kid, to fight for our employees as we think about pushing back against this proposal, this proposed budget. I promise you I will do that. And it will take more than just BVSD to make this happen, Alex, to your point. And so we've already started some of those conversations, and knowing and understanding this is a tough year for budget. And if this goes forward as passed, there's going to be a lot of things changing in BVSD that people probably will not like.
I want to piggyback on. Thanks for bringing those points up, Alex. There were things in the front of my mind. On slide 6, I've been wondering, your timeline that's been in place for 20 years, I struggle a little bit with having that window for staffing allocations feel as permanent as it always has been, given the changes that the elimination of averaging might present. And I wonder if there's a way to make that box look different and maybe shaded or dotted lines to indicate that isn't necessarily going to be the reality for the rest of this year. I just don't want to set like, oh, well, this slide says, and your timeline says, we will know by April. We may not, depending on how this all shakes out. There are implications that need to be considered. So that timeline and being committed to that, there's probably other things that timeline impacts, negotiations and other things, but that is something that I'm really looking at in our timeline, and how averaging will definitely impact abilities to think through staffing.
Just think about it like this. We'll have to be ultra conservative. You're right. You're going to have more people on limited term contracts. You'll have less people that you can offer regular contracts to, right? You're going to have to do some type of allocating, right? But to the extent that you can give somebody all their positions and they can do all their interviews and be hired before May ends, that may not be a reality anymore. Now, I don't want to. I'm trying to, strike a balance without sounding tons and tons of alarms for folks, but also being realistic about the situation. I think that to the extent that we have contractual obligations that we're obligated to meet, I think that we need to look at that. And I also think that there are some things that we may have to negotiate and open up the contract and think about. As we think about ways in which we can navigate this new environment. And so to the extent that, we will lean on our strong, long-going partnership with our associations and just, put the facts in front of everyone and start to figure those things out. So I would say this, is if there are massive changes that happen with this budget development process, then we'll just have to bring that forward to the public and let them know what's changed. Like I'm saying right now, things are going to change to the extent we don't know. Again, we're very early in the budget process, but if it stays on this path, we won't be able to do things the way we've done them.
Bill, my understanding is that UPK and the school lunch program costs are also exceeding anticipated revenues, and so working through the JBC is, with UPK has got a first look and they have some recommendations, but as that situation continues to unfold and we potentially have shortfalls there, how do you expect that to impact our budget and the need for our general fund to potentially help continue to support those programs in particular?
We're in our second year of UPK, and it continues to change. So we'll see if there are further developments in how they decide to use the online application process, any changes to that. Any decisions that they make mid-year to be within their fiscal constraints at the state level, because that tax revenue isn't coming in as hoped. So that's UPK. For the free meals for all, the conversations, the CDE, there was a whole task force that got together to explore different options of how to make that program sustainable. And it covered the full gamut from we need to go ask for more revenue to, just make some school districts pay for it. Make all the high school kids, there's all kinds of different options. It was funded out of the state ed fund this year, just because they're not generating the right amount of revenue. I think it's something that the legislature needs to wrestle with, is the idea that they have the power to put tax increases in front of the electorate, and they should get accustomed to that. The voters have the option to say no, but the legislature is sort of, I don't know, afraid maybe to put tax increases in front of people, where I think that they should get more accustomed to doing that to help get the word out. It's inexpensive, right? If any grassroots effort is going to put something in front of the voters, it's, you know, $250,000 to go get signatures to get that to happen, whereas the legislature can just have a vote and put it in front of the voters. So I think that's one thing that hopefully they'll, it's actually their obligation within Tabor. Tabor does not say there will never be a tax increase ever. It's just that you need to go ask the voters. And so, okay, do that process and ask the voters, and they get the option to say no. But when you ask the question, the voters say no, and then you have to make reductions at the state legislative level, that's a little bit more visible consequences of not providing adequate funding for public services in the state. When, you know, the cash funds that come in from hunting licenses drive up the amount of dollars into the state that creates a Tabor refund that has to come out of the general fund. I mean, that cycle of more people enjoying the state's activities drives up the refunds is just sort of a perverse way of this Tabor ramification. So the legislature should get used to asking to have those appropriate funding for public services, in my opinion.
Alex?
If I could bring us back to sort of stuff within our control, I appreciate that Colorado has really screwed up state finance and that Tabor sucks and that we should change that as a state and a people. I believe that's not something BVSD is going to decide, and I think the fact that we had a special session that did such detriment to our finance is indicative that the politics don't look like they're about to switch to where we're going to go fix Tabor and get more revenue and have people put a bunch of new taxes in front of the electorate in the next few years. So I think we could have more constructive conversations that are focused on the stuff within our control. Can you fill me in on some of the other budget pressures that, and also put in perspective what a $12 million hole is in terms of other things? I mean, I put that 12 million in a roughly $480 million general operating budget as a percentage of like a 2.5% hole. Is that, in the big picture, is that maybe a realistic or proportional way to think about what the 12 million hole looks like? And what other things also cost $12 million where there is any incremental flexibility on our part?
Well, K-12 education is a service industry, and so the costs that we have are in staff. The idea that an elementary school costs $4 to $5 million to run with all the staff for all the students, and all the projections are that you don't save anywhere near that amount of money when you close a school. So this is not a suggestion that closing schools saves enough money, but that's like 3 elementary schools that go away and all the staff and all the everything, and the kids get squeezed into the remaining schools, driving up class sizes. So like, that's the size of the issue.
I think it's tough. I mean, at this point in the budget, to know, okay, if we're short 12 million, where would the 12 million come from? That's kind of what you're asking us. 90% of our budget's people. And I think that, we'd have to really look at everything, both future and current, that we're wanting to do to try to preserve, the efforts that are happening to support our students in our classrooms, for sure. And look at the things that we have implemented that are helping us move the needle across the district, with a focus on supporting those critical pieces. And I think that's really going to be the job, right? That'll be my job. That'll be Bill's job. That'll be our team's job as we try to think about making up that difference in a way that has we're going to feel it for sure, but that preserves those critical functions as best we can. But there's things that we do here that we spend more money on than other folks would spend money on, that have become expectations, right, within our community. And some of those things might be things that we would just have to look at doing differently. And, operationally, food service, transportation, I mean, big divisions, big chunks, schools, services, we're going to have to look at all those things.
Board members, Jason, any questions?
No, but thanks, Bill, for your expertise and sobering presentation. Appreciate it.
One thing I wanted to go back to in the presentation was that the strategic plan does guide our fiscal budget decision-making processes, and I am grateful that we just revised our strategic plan. We have a clear path forward, and that while it sometimes, regardless of how that shakes out, it feels like we're going to have to be making some types of decisions, but that really is going to guide us in that process. And I think relying on that saves the board, saves the public, saves it from trying to think of those small little levers to push. It's like, well, how does our plan guide us? And we have a great plan in place. Thank you, Bill, for that very thorough and, as Jason said, sobering presentation. Board members, we have one more information item this evening, and that is the legislative update. We've touched on a few items regarding that in our budget presentation, but I will hand it over to Dr. Anderson for a more detailed overview.
Thank you, Board President Rajpal. Legislative update. We're gearing up for our legislative breakfast in January, making sure that we have all of our materials, as we've previously discussed, board members, getting one-pagers ready, topical. We'll have one-pagers ready around some of this budget stuff, one-pagers ready on the accountability update. And then as we prepare between now and January, as topics are emerging, we'll be in touch with the board on what some of those other one-pagers may look like that we can present, again, beginning to try to build synergy around the common issues that some of our front-range super districts will be facing and dealing with, and trying to align support around the things that we know will not only help our students, but help students across the Front Range. And so it's we're winding down here in December. Things will ramp up pretty quick when we come back in January.
Board members, one question I have for you all as we think about that packet, and thanks, Rob, for mentioning that we're going to be making those updates. CASB has also developed a one-pager. They have asked during the delegate assembly that boards consider including their one-pager along with districts' information to legislators. And so I am highlighting that request, and I think you saw that before the delegate assembly, when I went down to Pueblo, we saw that, but maybe we bring that back to the board and decide if that is something we indeed want to do. As Alex said, sometimes the CASB positions are not entirely aligned with ours, and so I think it's something for us to come to agreement on whether we want to include that with our documentation as well. Okay, we will be moving now on to action items, consent grouping. 9.1 personnel items, 9.2 approval of minutes, November 19th, 2024, 9.3 abatement at Boulder High School, 9.4 acceptance of donation Eisenhower Elementary, 9.5 acceptance of donation Netherland Elementary, 9.6 amendment of funding agreement for construction at Summit Middle Charter School, 9.7 amendment for construction at Boulder Tech, 9.8 amendment for construction at Casey Middle School. 9.9 amendment for construction at the Education Center, 9.10 amendment for construction at Escuela Bilingual Pioneer, 9.11 amendment for construction at Horizons K-8 School, 9.12 amendment for construction at Louisville Middle School, 9.13 amendment for construction at Ryan Elementary School, 9.14 annual comprehensive financial report, otherwise known as the ACFR, 9.15 cancellation of the December 24th, 2024 board meeting, 9.16, close of the bond-funded work for Monarch Campus. 9.17, contract with Blueprint Skilled Services LLC. 9.18, contract with ENA Services LLC. 9.19, contract with Triad Services Solutions. 9.20, acceptance of bond-funded work at Lafayette Elementary School. 9.21, final acceptance of bond-funded work at Centennial Middle School for tennis courts. 9.22, HVAC filter purchase. 9.23, renewal of the DHE Computer Systems LLC contract. 9.24, resolution 24-37, appointment to CHASA Board of Directors. 9.25, vacation of easement agreement. 9.26, grant academics instrument matching grant, Classics for Kids. 9.27, grant food services project scales, USDA Boise State. Are there any items board members would like to pull from the consent grouping? Seeing as there are none, we need a motion to approve before we discuss. Moved by Alex, seconded by Beth. Board members, any discussion on items within the consent grouping? Bill, thank you for your service to the CHASA Board of Directors. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Oida,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sargent,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Moving now to the action items on this evening's agenda, board members. We have Resolution 24-35, certification of mill levies. Do we have a motion? Moved by Alex, seconded by Kitty. Is there any discussion on the certification of mills, board members? Seeing as there are none, Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Oida,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sargent,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next, board members, we have Resolution 24-36, supporting students and families. Do we have a motion? Moved by Kitty, seconded by Lelania. Board members, is there any discussion on this item? Kitty, then Lelania.
I was just, golly, every time I touch my computer, the screen changes. I was going to suggest that we actually read this resolution, even though it's long, but because of the impact that it's going to have.
That is a great idea, Kitty. Would you like to do the honors?
Sure, if I can get my screen back. Yes, it'll come back, hang on. I'm almost there. Okay, I'm ready. Do you want me to do it now? Whereas the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Whereas in order to learn and thrive, children must know that the school district will support their safety and emotional well-being regardless of disability, race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, national origin, immigration/citizenship status, religion, ancestry, family compositions, or physical characteristics. Whereas students deserve to feel safe and honored for who they are. Whereas the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education has become a national model for school districts seeking to create safe schools for all students by adopting equitable policies and transparently reviewing data in pursuit of the school district's strategic plan. Whereas Colorado also is a national leader, including in passing HB 19-1192 to ensure the inclusion of the history, culture, and social contributions of racial and ethnic groups and LGBTQ individuals in public school curricula and academic standards. Whereas since the U.S. Supreme Court's 1982 decision, Plyler v. Doe, federal law has recognized the right of all children, regardless of immigration status, to enroll in public schools. Whereas federal guidance recognizes schools are protected spaces where federal immigration authorities should not conduct immigration activities, unquote. Further, the guidance clearly states the federal agency's belief that we can accomplish our enforcement mission without denying or limiting individuals' access to needed medical care, children's access to their schools, the displaced access to food and shelter, people of faith access to their places of worship, and more. Adherence to this principle is one bedrock of our stature as public servants. Whereas the school district values and prioritize family and community partnerships, including in its strategic plan, knowing that our students need their parents, guardians, and other adults in their lives for their well-being, including their educational success, and whereas statements being made regarding possible actions to be taken at the federal level have caused some of the school district's families, students, and staff to feel insecure and unsafe. Whereas the board is committed to policies and practices that support and represent the diverse people and families in our communities and assures that students can access their education as guaranteed by the Colorado Constitution and both Colorado and federal law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the school district shall do everything in its lawful power to protect our students and families, regardless of immigration status, including but not limited to the following actions. The school district will continue its practice to not collect or maintain any information about our students or their families or guardians' immigration status. The school district shall assist families in keeping emergency contacts up to date and otherwise support families in making emergency plans should families feel a need to do so, and shall support students who may feel that they and their families are at risk. The school district's Office of Legal Counsel shall respond to any request by federal immigration officials for entry into any school district, school, or other school district property, to communicate with any student while that student is under the supervision of the school district during any school activity or while using school district transportation, for any information about our students and families. Be it further resolved that the school district shall do everything in its lawful powers to protect our LGBTQ students and community members, including through implementation of Title IX and other related federal and state laws and board policies, and an ongoing commitment to creating schools that are free of discrimination, harassment, and bullying. Be it further resolved that the school district shall not tolerate hate speech, including anti-Semitic speech and other forms of religious harassment. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education restates its commitment to creating equitable school conditions through its policies prohibiting bullying, discrimination, and harassment. Principals, teachers, students, and parents in all of our schools are encouraged to immediately report such behaviors through the school district's website and expects that all such reports will be fairly and timely investigated. www.bvsd.org/parents-students/be-ready/make-a-report. Be it further resolved that the superintendent and staff shall identify for the board any updates to policies and procedures necessary to implement this resolution. Be it further resolved that the school district shall post this resolution at every school site and distribute it to school district staff and parents in all the predominantly used languages of the school district, and shall broadly communicate the commitments of this resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the BVSD Board of Education adopts this resolution on this 10th day of December, 2024.
Thank you, Kitty. It is days like today and resolutions like these that make me really proud to be part of BVSD.
Me too.
Board members, discussion, further discussion on this resolution. Elenia.
Thank you to outstanding work via Kathleen and her team on this resolution.
Jason.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting. You kind of stole my words there, Nicole. I just listening to Kitty, listening to you read that, and I'm sorry I'm not there in the room, but it just makes me proud to be part of this district, and some of the gravity of the words, really reminds us of our responsibilities here. So thanks for all the work on that, and thank you, Kitty, for your suggestion to read that. That was really powerful.
Jorge.
Thank you for the work on this. I think our discussion, the last meeting talked about this, was really important that we were all in the same step moving forward on this. And we've heard from our community members who are also saying that we're aligned and we're standing together. And I think it's important. This reflects our values and our sentiments about what we believe in, but also speaks to the action that we want to take as a district to protect our students who may be singled out. And so I really appreciate this. And that it creates a real link that people can reach out to if they need help or support. So thank you for the work on this.
Beth.
Yeah, I'll just join the chorus in wanting to thank Kathleen and her team for creating this. And something that kind of stands out for me is this last part, that this will be posted at every school site and distributed to the school district staff and parents in all predominantly used languages of the school district. That's really powerful and amazing. And I think it is a testament to this board's resolve and this district's commitment to supporting all students. So thank you for that.
Alex?
Yeah, I have two things. One is to ditto what you've said, and I think it bears repeating that as leaders on a school board in a district, this is one of those cases where I think we're reflecting the value of our community, and this is what our community values, and we are there as part of that, making sure that our schools and our institutions do what we can to reflect our values. And I have, dare I say it, a line edit. Well, it's only because of what you're saying about how visible this will be, that one of the bullets strikes me as not quite reflecting what it means, and it takes sort of a careful reading of it to get it right. So I don't know if it's in order or not, but I would propose adding a couple words in the where the part where it says the school district's Office of Legal Counsel shall respond to any request by federal immigration officials. Now, what it's saying substantively is that when the legal counsel responds to that, they shall keep in mind the things that are 3 paragraphs before. But I'd like to reference that again. So now it reads superficially, if you just take it out of context, as if our legal counsel will be responsive to these requests, when in fact what it's meaning is that the legal counsel shall follow through on our principles and the rest of this as they respond to legal requests. Does that distinction make a difference? Kathleen, maybe you could speak to that?
Yeah, I do think that words matter. So I do think, I wonder if, even since we're there already, if more helpful language might be, schools will forward all requests to the Office of Legal Counsel, who will respond. Because then our schools would have that assurance that we're trying to offer them, that they can educate our kids, and we will work on these other issues.
So just for clarity, we have a motion on the floor. Do we need to amend that to include the changes presently discussed prior to passing?
I would, yes.
Does anybody want, Alex, would you?
I would move to make a conceptual amendment that Kathleen would work out the language to that reflects that direction, that those people in schools would direct those requests to our council.
Laura, do you want to call the roll on that?
Yes. Who actually made the second? I didn't.
Kitty,
Thank
sorry.
you. Okay, this is the motion to approve making the amendment. Chavez.
Yes.
Medler.
Yes.
Niznik.
Yes.
Quinlan Aweda.
Yes.
Rajpal.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So then we, unless there's further discussion, board members, we would go back to the motion to approve this resolution with the inclusion of the language in the amendment we just also approved. Was there a motion?
Okay, so this is to approve the resolution as amended.
Correct.
Chavez.
Yes.
Medler.
Yes.
Niznik.
Yes.
Quinlan Aweda.
Yes.
Rajpal.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And thanks to all the community members who provided feedback in advance of this resolution. We will now move on to policy action items, board members. Our first action item will be board policy IKF graduation requirements. Do we have a motion to approve this policy? Moved by Kitty. Seconded by Jorge. Board members, any discussion on this policy? I'll start while everybody's pulling that policy up. I wanted to thank legal counsel for making some changes grammatically to improve the clarity of this policy and improve our community's ability to understand the inclusions of it. Kitty.
Okay, hang on. I'm trying to find it. It's in the section where we talk about students being prepared for college and, is it industry? And my proposal would to make that and or. But let me see. I tried to put it in my Google Drive. Let me see if I can find my suggestion on that. Here it is. Come on, open. Right, so it would be under college and career readiness. And the second paragraph under there, students must complete at least one of the measures and meet or exceed the measure's corresponding cut score or criteria to demonstrate college and/or career readiness in English and math. Since not every single student is going to college, does that make sense? Does that make sense, Kathleen?
Yes.
Okay, and then there's another instance of it in the following paragraph. And I have a few other grammatical things that I'll just send off to you. Oh, no, I did have one more, sorry. Under elective credits, 70 credits, and it says a maximum of 5 credits of community service may be earned as an elective, and then recommended 15 or more hours of volunteer work equals 1 credit. So is that really just recommended and not required? And if so, how do you determine if what's recommended isn't followed?
My understanding is that that recommendation creates a standard that building principals can then apply based on the type of community service that the student might engage with and the intensity of that service, as well as the overall hour commitment.
Okay, so it doesn't need to be more specific than just recommended?
No, my sources say no.
Okay.
Alex?
On that front, I guess I was reading the switch from 75 for 5 credits to 15 per 1 as producing more flexibility in case schools were giving credit for less service, not to change the status or the criteria that were used. That's how I understood it.
Right, well, I was just looking at the word recommended,
Right.
not the numbers.
If we figured out what to do with the recommended part, I have another edit to propose. I really appreciate, again, the work by council and all by the people working that's gone into this. We had a discussion at the last meeting where we talked about the cut where we're taking out the sophisticated and competitive skill levels and the physical education waivers. And I made a case for inserting really more attention to, say, a student's well-being and accessing activities they can do for lifelong wellness. And in that spirit, I appreciate replacing the sophisticated and competitive with adequate rigor. But I might suggest making another amendment in the list where it says the activities that are there, and it has the IE of mountain biking and ultimate frisbee. To illustrate what I'm talking about, I'd be interested in saying mountain biking, comma, yoga, comma, dancing, and ultimate frisbee to illustrate what I mean about non-competitive sports that could very well lead to student well-being and lifelong access to physical activity.
So one clarification there is it says, or compare non-CHASA school activities, but we don't, which we have mountain biking and ultimate frisbee as a school activity that are non-CHASA sports. I hear you on the wellness part, and I would also say that those components are not necessarily school activities, but our PE classes, we do offer walking and yoga and those types of more wellness focus that are not necessarily competitive type PE classes. So I don't know if that would help some of your wondering on that position.
It's a good point that the above point is talking about the school activities, and I was still thinking about the waiver process. Thinking of my own kids who did stuff like yoga and climbing that may be school or may not be school. So maybe that we need another IE down there under the other part where we list some of those other activities.
I'll defer. I know Athletic Review Committee has weighed in on this multiple times, but I was, and we've heard reports, but I've never been, nor am I currently on that committee, so I would defer to Harry Waterman, our legal counsel, or others that have that expertise. And then I saw two hands, Kitty and Elenia.
I thought that the waiver discussion was centered more around an equity issue, where folks were getting waivers for doing club sports. And I don't have a very strong opinion about whether that's right or wrong, but if you're getting it for yoga or mountain biking or club sport, maybe all of that's fine. I just am not sure we've ever hashed that out completely about what we're trying to do with waivers. And also to one of Nicole's previous points, why are we requiring 15 credits of PE and 10 credits of foreign language? Isn't that right? Is that right? 10 credits of foreign language? I mean, I don't feel that we've ever really dug into the waiver issue to look at the equity or maybe even some of the common sense of it.
With this topic, board members, as I said at the last board meeting, passing this to ensure that our students are graduating with here, the higher education, admissions requirements, and kind of getting towards back practice was a right first step, and that we could potentially take another pass on some of these athletics waivers and PE as a next go round. And I'm bringing this up just because timing does matter, so people can start planning, and we have our open enrollment window ends, and we have our transition nights beginning for this class of 2029 in January, actually, right after that window. And so those kiddos need to be coming in with an understanding of their graduation expectations. And if this discussion was going to take longer to give it the attention it deserves, I would strongly recommend we take that as iteration number 2 on this policy. But I hear you, and that is what I did bring up that. Kitty.
Okay, so I have a question, and it's purely grammatic. It has nothing to do with whether we throw yoga in there or rock climbing or whatever. So when we're saying mountain biking and ultimate frisbee, we're being specific about those two things. Is that correct? Okay, because I had thought when I read it that that was an example. So I was going to change IE to EG, but if it's really specifically that, then it should stay IE.
Dr. Anderson.
So, I know that that at our last meeting discussing this, that this is something you all want to dig into. And I do think that to do that, the implications of adding specific fundamental changes, and from what I'm understanding, it's things that are certified club sports but not CHSAA sports, and expanding that to individual activities that go beyond club, which would be a change, right? Which is something that we could consider, but there's whole processes and things that you would have to do to validate that, to verify that. I don't think that was the intention of cleaning this up now. And if it was, we would have to pull the policy and wait another year to do that. I just don't know that we have the space and time to be able to make those changes now for the next graduating class.
Alex.
In the short term, I would support Kitty's proposal of turning IE into EG, because I think that gets at what I'm talking about, so that we're not being exclusive now in our policy. And I'll note this policy was last updated 7 years ago and has gone through a decade-long periods between updates. So getting the political will to update this in the long term, I know we might iterate it, but I do think it could take another decade. So I would prefer to at least insert the EG instead of the IE, to Kitty's point.
Can I ask, are there any actual other school sports that are not CHSAA? I mean, there is, I can't think of any other except for those two that are non-CHSAA sports that we provide. Not that I mean, the grammatical new.
These are the two primary activities that I'm aware of. And it's true that we did change this language since the board last looked at it. The intent was really to correct some of that language that I believe the board asked me during open meeting to interpret, and I couldn't because the language was confusing. Dr. Anderson stepped in, I think, and clarified that. And then this language was really just intended to clean that up and to reflect what is my understanding of current practice. But if it is too much of a shift, then we can revert to that same language. We can postpone to the 17th, which is also a voting meeting. Or we could, okay, stop talking.
So board members, just to kind of think through our Robert's Rules of Order, there is a motion to approve this language. If we wanted to, and I'll add an insert that I actually think that does make more sense when you read that. But if we wanted if we wanted to amend and revert this section on waivers back to the previous language, that would require an amendment like we just, in the process we just undertook for the resolution on protecting families. So if somebody would like that option, a motion would be required. Yes, Jorge, you can ask a question.
I just want to be clear on what this current language is saying, because I got a little confused on the CHSAA discussion, because we have an or there, so right? So non-CHSAA school activities, i.e. mountain bike and ultimate frisbee, that means that those specific activities are non-CHSAA, or a comparable activity outside the school program, supervised or structural physical activity. And that would be comparable to what Alex is saying that we need some examples of, keeping the current language. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Yes, you've stated correctly what I understand that paragraph means. So it really is taking language that was a little bit clunkier and just saying there are 3 ways we do it: CHSAA approved, non-CHSAA approved school activities, or those comparable activities that are outside of school.
And as a clarifying, those are have always been and will continue to be approved by the building principal.
By the building principal, that's correct.
And I think in practice, those have been club sports. So I just want, to Alex's point, in practice, those have always been club sports. I've not seen, now there could be an example out there someone else is aware of someone saying, I go to aerobics every week, and their building principal letting them out of gym. I have no idea. But I just want to make sure that this is reflective of what we're currently doing.
Yes, that's my understanding, that this is reflective of what we are currently doing.
Alex.
I guess substantively, what I was hoping to get to are the experiences of children like my own who are not interested in competitive team sports and who wouldn't play on a competitive club, but would do a sport that they loved or an activity that they loved that gave them great physical activity and lifelong access to well-being. And I would hate for a system set up by coaches who are used to competitive sports thinking, oh, well, this kid's doing this thing that's not like the stuff everybody does, when in fact the whole idea of a waiver is to facilitate a kid from a different circumstance following their joy and finding physical activity that makes them healthy. So I'm still in favor of moving in this direction. I'd much rather make these edits than not. Again, I'd probably, again, take out the IE so that I don't have a narrow-minded interpretation of this, thinking this is all it could be, when I'd like them to be open-minded and encouraging of whatever gets a kid active who might probably hate PE class in the high school and find an activity out of high school that they really enjoy.
Kitty.
So I have a question for Alex. So in the second parenthetical, I guess it would be the third parenthetical statement, but the one that says i.e. supervised and/or structured physical activities and so on, would that cover what you're talking about?
Yes, and what I had proposed, what I had proposed in our last meeting was to take out sophisticated and competitive, so I appreciate that that struck, and it's sort of replaced with adequate rigor. But I was still trying to get to an open-minded and a broad interpretation of what that takes, so that it wasn't competitive team sports always.
But this isn't yeah, I'm just trying to understand how this does not address your concerns. Not arguing with your concerns, I'm just trying to figure this out.
I think it does, as long as people are thinking about adequate rigor the same way I am, instead of the way a basketball coach might think about it.
Well, I would think that if it were, say, yoga, adequate rigor in yoga would be totally different from rigor in something that was involved a lot more motion and moving through space.
That's why I would love an EG that includes yoga and dance as examples of things that we're talking about, so that someone who's not familiar with how intense yoga can be thinks that it doesn't deserve the kind of waiver that being on another club does.
So, board members, since I think we heard that nobody wanted to make a motion on amending this language, and we still have the motion on the floor to approve this policy, and we have also previously prioritized bringing this back with some discussions, particularly around sports and PE and that part of this discussion. I would, if there's any other discussion outside of that topic, I think we can entertain it, but maybe moving toward a vote. Alex.
I support moving towards a vote, and I think my intention here is probably better addressed through implementation.
Dr. Anderson.
So I appreciate the discussion, and I think that you want to do something like this that isn't subjective to the extent that, because there's words are included or not included. I mean, I do think that a different look at how we require PE and physical education would take a little bit of a longer conversation, but also a regulation to the extent that says, what are the processes in which you decide or not decide? Because, to the extent that right now it's up to the building principal, right, to approve any waivers or not, that's correct? This is the principle, is to get to a place, if we want to have more inclusive opportunities for folks to be able to earn waivers of credit for demonstrating physical activity through things that aren't already sanctioned by the school, whether a club or it's the HSAA. I just want to be really clear that we're not, with the changes in the language that have been made, that's not the expectation that we're changing anything until we come back, have that other conversation. Again, it already has been prioritized. And so to the extent that we can bring that back for the next graduating class and come to some consensus on what that looks like, it was my understanding that that's what we would be doing. And so whether that's in the fall, which would give us plenty of time for to continue to do that. I just don't, if you start changing or shifting language, I just don't want there to be an interpretation that means we're shifting what qualifies or doesn't qualify for a waiver until we've had that conversation. knowing and understanding that I think that is the right conversation to have. I just want to be really clear on the specificity that I think we would need to get into to be able to navigate something like that.
Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez.
Yes.
Medler.
Yes.
Niznik.
Yes.
Quinlan Oeda.
Yes.
Rajpal.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
At this point in the evening, we have a comfort break request, and so the board is going to take a very brief adjournment. I'd like to call the meeting this evening's meeting back to order. Board members, we are now on the policy study item section of this evening's agenda. We have 2 policies for study this evening, the first of which is Board Policy JRLE, interrogations by law enforcement officials. At this point, I will hand it over to Kathleen Sullivan.
Thank you. Board members, we did put together just a few slides that have the constitutional authority that underpins both of the policies we're going to talk about tonight. It seemed important in light of the public comment we've received, as well as, I think, the DAC committee's memo, just to ground us in what the legal requirements are. So searches really rest on the Fourth Amendment. That is our governing and important law we need to pay attention to. The Fourth Amendment, of course, that prevents unreasonable searches and seizures. I wish our history teacher from Broomfield High School were here to really put this all in context, but I'll do my best. So, of course, the Fourth Amendment applies, right, to government. And when the Supreme Court really looked at the Fourth Amendment in the context of schools, we have 2 important cases. The first one, New Jersey versus TLO, is a Supreme Court case that looked at whether that law enforcement standard that we understand applies to searches, where law enforcement officials would need probable cause in order to have a constitutional search. In New Jersey versus TLO, the Supreme Court really looked at those requirements and tried to balance the extent of requirements that would be put in place against the public interest that we have to navigate in public schools. How much process are we going to require when we're trying to balance a school's need to take action to protect the safety, welfare of their institutions and their students? And what the Supreme Court said is in the center of this slide. It's evidence the school setting requires some easing of these restrictions, and that it wouldn't be reasonable to require a teacher to obtain a warrant because it would unduly interfere with our ability to really do what we need to do to protect kids. So it's from this case law that we have the Supreme Court standard that requires that school officials must have a reasonable suspicion to justify a search of a student. And when we really look at what it means, there's a second case that the Supreme Court heard in 2009, Stafford United School District versus Reading, that had to do with the extent of the search that the school could do. So not a question about whether it was appropriate to search, but in this case, this involved a middle school student. They were searching for high-strength ibuprofen pills. And this student had on a t-shirt and leggings and was asked by staff to remove clothing, turn out underwear and undergarments. And that was the case where the Supreme Court said, we're going to have two standards that apply to school districts. First of all, you have to be justified at the inception of a search, meaning you have to have a reasonable suspicion that your search is going to turn up evidence that the student has violated board policy. And the second requirement is that any search, even if it's reasonable in its inception, is also reasonable in scope, meaning that the way that the search is carried out is respectful of the student's age, gender, and the nature of the infraction that we're looking for. So this is really the constitutional standard established through those two primary cases. When we look now at the issue of interrogation, I want to point out for the board, both of these policies have been in place since the 80s. And our current board policy is termed interrogations by law enforcement officials. So it's really important that we understand what this term interrogation actually means. It rests on the Fifth Amendment. I've highlighted because this is a really dense amendment. So in bold, you'll see the language around interrogation. This is really about not being able to compel a person's statements that could be used against them in a criminal case. That's the authority that we are attending to with this requirement. When we look at the case law, Miranda is the big case law. It really interprets the Fifth Amendment to apply to custodial interrogations, which means it's an interrogation being done by law enforcement in a custodial situation where a person isn't free to leave. That's what we're talking about when we talk about interrogations. This really applies to law enforcement, and I think our public commenter was referencing that earlier tonight. So when we turn to the revisions themselves, starting with, I think JRLE is first, so we can start with that one. I would say a few things. So the original policy that the board started with is really just a couple of paragraphs, which is why this policy has so much redlined content. I think one of the questions that comes up repeatedly with schools and with parents sometimes is, when a school official wants to talk to my student about misconduct or something that's happened during the school day, what does that look like? So the proposal on this policy is to expand the topic it addresses, to address interrogations by law enforcement officials, but also to provide our schools and our families with guidance around these other types of interactions they would have. So interviews by school personnel, those really do have to be appropriate, but we don't have those obligations related to custodial interrogation like Miranda. The other thing that we have an awful lot of in our schools that raise a lot of questions for school leaders is after we've made a mandatory report, when a public agency, either law enforcement or Child Protective Services, wants to come to a school to interview a child, they have an absolute right under statute because they are vested with that obligation to investigate child abuse. So the proposal is to add that content to this policy so that it really can be instructive and provide that more comprehensive guidance. So the DAC, we did ask DAC earlier this fall when they were looking for some policy work. We provided JRS and JRLE to them, I think it was September. And so we did ask that DAC would provide us with their feedback so that I could try and incorporate it into a red line for the board. Because of when I received that feedback, I had to go back and forth with our staff on this more than I might ordinarily like to do. So originally the board was looking at a red line that really talked about, if you have to do this interrogation at school, law enforcement official, these are the conditions we're going to put in place. And the DAC had a lot of comments, I think, in their memo about making sure that those were sufficiently strong. So we did make some additional revisions, and I just want to point that out to the board now. So the definitions and everything on policy, on the first page, stay the same, but that paragraph at the top of page 2 was modified after hearing from DAC and after talking with our safety and security leaders in the district, so that we can be clear with law enforcement and our schools. We know that a law enforcement interrogation raises significant issues of legal and individual rights. And I do think that some of the DAC language that they were asking was pushing this policy a little far. I can't give legal advice to students about how they should engage with law enforcement. So we really need to make sure that we're drawing a very careful line there. So this top paragraph says, just first of all, our fundamental belief that if law enforcement is seeking to do an interrogation of a student that they believe is engaged in criminal conduct, they really need to try to organize that activity outside of school while our students have access to their parents, guardians, and other trusted adults that can actually give them advice as to how to proceed. The rest of these numbered steps that we're asking school personnel to take if there is a law enforcement official who is present and seeking to interrogate a student are really just more specific iterations of what the board had in policy previously, and also incorporate some language from the CASB sample. So obviously we need to confirm we're dealing with law enforcement. We would make sure that we have a principal or a designee who's familiar with this policy that accompanies the student until the parent or guardian can be present. That is current practice. It's reflected in our current language. This is just more specific. Paragraph 3, also more specific. We have always made an effort to talk with families, but this language tells our school leaders we expect them to notify parents and then to talk to law enforcement and say, by board policy, I need to ask you to wait to do anything here until the student has access to their parent and guardian. And that the school, and this is really where I'm trying to walk that line between legal advice and just information to support our students, that the school would inform the student that they may have legal rights associated with that request to interrogate them, and that they can elect to wait for their parent and guardian to be present. So just providing, again, more specific language. We did incorporate a new requirement in Colorado law to make sure we're making sure our students are questioned in a private space. And then also just a general assertion that we would make sure our school leaders are asking law enforcement to follow all applicable safeguards. Again, our hope is that we will not need those more specific steps because we're communicating clearly our belief that those interrogations should take place outside of school, but it does give us some specific direction. If our school officials find themselves with an officer with a badge and a gun standing in front of them demanding access to a student, which is the way they've relayed these scenarios to us when they're asking for guidance. So we believe that this will equip them with the information that they would need to navigate these really challenging situations.
Thank you for that thorough overview of case law and incorporation of that into this policy. I see Kitty has her hand up, so we'll start with her.
Excuse me, one thing that confuses me a little bit about this is this policy includes interviews and interrogations with the idea that the student may have committed either a crime or an infraction, but then it also includes interviews by child protection where the concern is that the child didn't commit something, they are the victim of it. But what's not mentioned in here is if law enforcement is going to interview a child because of concerns the child has been a victim, but the suspected perpetrator is not a family member, then child services doesn't get involved, and it would just be law enforcement, but that would not be an interrogation, it would be an interview. And most likely, they wouldn't even do it at the school anyway. They would take them to Blue Sky Bridge. But there are times when they have to do it at the school, if it's like the parent's about to come pick them up and the kids, they think the kid's going to be a danger. Or the perpetrator who's not a parent will pick them up. And I don't know what I'm asking, it just sounds like we have two different things in here, and perhaps there might be a different way to organize it as, interviews when the student is a suspect, and interviews when the student is suspected to be a victim. Then it doesn't matter who's interviewing if they're the victim, whether it's law enforcement or child protection services.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that, and then we'll go to you, Lalenia? In our section on interviews by school personnel, it does talk about victims and witnesses. Kitty's talking about victims, perpetrators. Does the process differ? Or is the process the same? And is that important to the question and how we address the question that Kitty proposed?
The process is definitely different if it is a school interview or if it is a law enforcement interrogation. Absolutely. So I hear that question, and I'm thinking about some additional changes we can make when this comes back to the board to clarify that around the interview section.
Yeah, and it noted on the interrogations versus interviews, but I was thinking like in the interview section, that nuance.
Yeah.
Kitty, then Lalenia.
I just want to clarify, because what I was talking about was just suspected child abuse.
Okay.
Not any other suspected, policy violation or crime.
Okay.
Lalenia.
I actually feel like I like the way it's organized. Because we're talking about interviews by authorized public officials regarding child abuse, neglect. I like that it parses it out 3 different ways, and it makes good sense to me. So I guess maybe I just want to understand what, I understand that, of course, it could be someone different doing an interview, but we've said authorized public officials.
But the title only says law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
No, it says
Student interviews and interrogations by law enforcement officials. Child protection workers are not law enforcement officials.
I wonder, Board Member Sargent, if I should just drop law enforcement officials from the title, so it's just interviews and interrogations.
That would make more sense to me.
Yeah.
Alex.
This is maybe just a legal precedent question, but how is the school interview not custodial if the kids have mandatory attendance? Like they're in our custody and that they can't leave. So the same question about the police officer who's doing the interrogation when you can't leave should come into play, shouldn't it?
Not according to the Supreme Court. But I would say that that's an important piece of what we're trying to address with our students when we talk about law enforcement officials accessing them at school. Is it possible for a child being interviewed by law enforcement, if they're suspected of wrongdoing, to think that they can leave if they're at school? I just don't know, which is why we went to the language that said we really are going to ask that you do this anywhere but at school, unless there's some sort of exigency.
And then I guess the intention for me would be not that the officer makes the kid step outside, but this is done when then their parent or guardian and counsel are involved. But it's not clear that the officer couldn't say, just wait for them when they leave and catch them outside, or say, well, let's step outside and continue this interview?
They wouldn't be able to say, let's step outside and continue the interview under this policy because the principal or designee would be required to stay present until a parent, guardian, or adult was there in their stead. So they can't just step outside the school building, just the officer and the student. This policy would prevent that.
And if I may, considering the complexity of this, little testimony tonight that's sort of in conflict with what the DAC said, when would this come back to us for action? And if we said, hey, we want some more input on this, how much are we slowing it down? Like, where are we in the process with our stakeholders, and what's the intention of how we would move forward?
So I would say this, unlike your graduation policy, these policies can be changed any time of year, and then what we're doing is training staff, which we're constantly doing anyway. So I had this scheduled to come back next week, but there's no reason that it would have to. If the board would like some more time spent or consideration of some other input, posting it for a while longer, seeing what other input we might get, then that's up to the will of the board.
And I'm happy to get engagement on all of our policies. To reiterate, the DAC had a long time with this. They were poked at multiple iterations to ensure that they were on timeline. And I do actually think it's important for us to understand the case law and for them to have, even if it's not like, if they felt rushed, have some early indications of where they were heading to help guide the conversation. And they can always come back. But I just want to make sure the board, they were prodded a few times to make sure that they were on track for this initial meeting, knowing that we always do study followed by action, and sometimes there's more space in between. So not hard and fast on this one, but. Other thoughts? Jorge?
For all these interviews and interrogations, it's clear guidance about when to contact parents for child protective agencies and law enforcement, but it doesn't speak to when school personnel. So thinking about the issue of age and ability to consent and at what point we involve parents, is there any way we can provide some guidance on that? I know it's outside the external agencies, but how do we distinguish that or guide that for our school leaders?
Yeah, I think we do need to provide that guidance, and there's one sentence at the end of that first paragraph that reads, such interviews do not require prior consent of the parents or guardian, but we could say consent or presence. This is a pretty consistent request, I'm not gonna lie. There are an awful lot of parents who want to tell us that we cannot speak to their children if they're not present. And realistically, in order to protect safety, return kids to instruction so that they are learning, that's just not feasible. So that's the gentle language that we were using.
I was actually thinking more after the fact, notifying parents after that their kid was interviewed, and it, in terms of defining what an interview is and all that.
I would second that. It's similar to the language that was inserted under assertions around notification to parents. So I think that feels reasonable. This is a big shift. This policy is really old. We have moved all of our student policies related to code, discipline, in a lot of positive directions, and I'm excited to see more clarity. I'm excited to see this have context around interviews, not just interrogations, and to have some of these protections for our students and notifications to our parents. I think those are really big positive steps in these red lines. So thank you for all of the iterations on that. And even though maybe the full body of the DAC didn't feel like they engaged a lot, I do still want to thank them, the policy subcommittee, for their work on both of these policies and for the information that they were able to provide us ahead of this meeting to help kind of guide board member thinking and the red lines of this document. So that partnership is always welcome. Any other questions on this red line this evening, board members, knowing it will come back with some changes? Yeah, Beth?
Just to wrap up my understanding, we are going to move forward with this because it can be iterative, and we're not going to kick it back to stakeholders to get more input, right? Like we're going to keep moving, and when will we see it again? I guess I'm asking.
Maybe a question. I mean, we heard from one DAC member who's not speaking on the behalf of the DAC this evening, as we could offer. They did not look at the red line. They did look at the original policies to help provide guidance. They were provided with state law. They were provided with the CASB example, of a lot of which had been included, and they provided their feedback based on that. We could, if the will of the board, give them an opportunity to provide additional feedback based on this red line. Again, no sense of urgency. I'd rather take the time rather than have it approve and then come back and then reapprove, if that is what the board is considering. Dr. Anderson.
So I don't want to speak on behalf of DAC, but I was at the DAC meeting. There were mixed opinions in the meeting in regards to these policies, but to your point, I'm not sure that everybody had the understanding of the difference between reasonable suspicion, probable cause. I think that maybe there's some confusions around, the role of a school search versus the role of an interrogation. So it would be interesting, and it did feel like they were pressed for time in that meeting. So to the extent that's helpful for the board on your conversation.
I'd be happy to check in with the DAC policy subcommittee, make sure that they've seen the red lines, and maybe gather some feedback from them about how much time they want, and report to the board next week at our policy work.
That sounds great. Next policy that you outlined a little bit is
Right.
JRS?
Yes, so JRS is the search policy. I've already provided the constitutional authority on which it is based. So we did incorporate more language from the CASB sample to make sure that we addressed multiple topics. And a lot of this actually came at the behest of DAC. They specifically asked us to address things like cell phones that we had not previously addressed in policy, but well before Dr. Anderson or many of us were here. We did have litigation in our district in 2008 on this issue, so I've incorporated that language into this policy. It is our practice in BVSD not to search cell phones unless there's an exigent circumstance because of the additional privacy protections that courts have applied around phones. Another thing that I would point out is that this policy actually explicitly addresses the fact that in our school district, we do not ask school personnel to conduct searches that are looking for firearms. This was a significant point of discussion 2 years ago when there was a shooting in our neighboring district. As part of a search of a student where they knew that they were looking for weapons. This is absolutely part of our practice. It is well discussed across our safety security teams and our building leadership, but that is on page 1 of this policy. I think that the other language you will see we included, DAC had requested that we make sure there's an administrative report written up if there's a search that is done. We've added language around privacy and non-binary students having voice in how that search is carried out. We added the cell phone piece, and then we also added language around searching of automobiles. And finally, new language that came from both the CASB sample and I believe DAC's request that talks about what we would do with items that may be seized as part of a search. And those are the updates we've proposed for the board's discussion.
Kitty?
Yeah, I have a question about non-binary students. What if there is no adult on staff? I don't even know how to phrase it. I mean, there's probably not going to be a non-binary adult in the room on staff, but what if there's no one whose gender identity makes the non-binary student feel comfortable?
We would only search if we had reasonable grounds to believe that we had a serious violation of board policy, which means we will make every effort to make that student, to afford them all the dignity and privacy that they deserve. Fundamentally, if we need to do a search to assure the protection of our school environment, we will give that student voice, and then the search will be carried out in the best professional judgment and discretion of our highly trained and caring educators.
I have a question about when the personal searches are conducted, the degree to which students are informed of the rationale for the search, and making sure that the students understand why they are being searched. And as long as that is in accordance with law, I think that would be helpful for our students and our families to understand. Similarly, with the searches, I'm wondering about situations in which a student may be searched. The student felt the search was unreasonable and nothing was found. What types of restorative practices might be helpful in that situation? Because a search of a person, which they might be asked, and then pat down, that particularly for our students that might have some trauma related to sexual assault or just power imbalances and feeling like now this person of authority I've been in this situation, are there restorative things to help mend that relationship? And the person required of doing these searches is not, it's pretty clear, we want trusting relationships in our buildings. Is there a way to weave any of that in a way that's meaningful? And if the answer is no, these are delicate situations, particularly if a student feels targeted unjustly. Keeping our schools safe and thinking about those situations is on my mind. Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, I do think it can be tricky, and I appreciate the sentiment. I think that that maybe we consider those things. I think my worry would be if you create too many conditions that would prevent people from searching kids that might be in the best interest of the safety of the school. I think that would be, what's the balance there? And I want to be, but I hear what you're saying. I worked in schools a long time, but it's been a while, right? And so things have certainly changed for the better. I'm just trying to think, potentially maybe we could take that back to some of our, and I'm guessing, Kathleen, you talked to school-based administrators and the security team around what are the things that they need to be able to do, and how do we do those in the right ways to make sure that we're ensuring safety in our schools? And I would think that as long as we're thinking about that balance, then that's what I would want to make sure we're doing.
Yes, 100%. And that was really the reason that there were some later red lines made, is because I had to confer with our safety and security team and couldn't do that until I had all of DAC's input or had a few things we needed to clarify. We did add some language. It's in the middle of page 2. in between those paragraphs that actually have some black language or black print that says, whenever possible, we will inform the student of the reason that we're conducting the search. We'll talk them through that. We'll really try to do it in an informed way. And then we did include that notification piece also on that page to make sure that parents are informed if there is a search that's done. And I do think that, we've almost tripled the length of this policy in terms of the guidance, and I will talk with our administrators again and just make sure we've struck that balance correctly, but see if there's some language that we can look at.
And then one more just comment related to the first two paragraphs on the second page related to searches. The final sentence of that first paragraph, searches of one person's are subject to XYZ. It's similar to the paragraph immediately following it. Searches of pockets, objects in the possession, pat down next to the clothing, and then it says it in the next paragraph kind of again.
Oh, I see that.
It's just a little bit redundant.
I see that.
And since we just said we expanded the language, it'd be an
Yes.
opportunity to contract the language a little at your will. Jorge.
This actually goes back to the earlier point. There will be an administrative report that's a part of this, and I don't know to what degree, maybe it's not in policy here, but to the degree to that we could be tracking this on a regular basis as part of our kind of broader discussion around discipline and their use of interrogations and searches to kind of understand the scope of how we're approaching students. I think maybe address some of the stuff that you're raising in terms of our appropriateness in targeting students and that sort of thing. And the other part was, I did notice that whenever possible, because I was kind of curious, that kind of caught my eye, to what degree would not be possible to disclose to a student why they're being searched, and what kind of, if that's necessary language of the whenever possible.
I think to Dr. Anderson's point, it's really hard sometimes to think about every circumstance that could possibly transpire. When I started as a school attorney 30 years ago, we were looking in purses for cigarettes, right? And that's some of what we do. But I do think that there may be circumstances where we have a very high-level threat concern and we're early in an investigation, and we might not at that time be able to talk about why the search was done, but we might be able to circle back to it later. So that's when the language I'm thinking about might be something like that. If it's not possible up front, to make sure there's a conversation with the student to try and address any concerns that might have arisen.
That's helpful.
Something like that.
So in that same paragraph, it talks about asking the students, or requesting the students' permission to perform the search, but then the next sentence pretty much says they're not allowed to say no, or they're going to get in trouble.
Right. It does. Because I think, right, hey, I don't hug people now without asking them. I think there's a lot of things that we used to do a little differently that probably maybe aren't the best trauma informed. But hey, I'm going to need to pat down your ankles now. You okay with that? Right? A little bit like the TSA.
So it sounds like it's just trying to be more gentle about it, but we're going to do it anyway, rather than saying, get on the floor, sucker.
Yes, for example.
Sorry, seen too much Law and Order, and it's getting late.
Alex.
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines, Kitty, not along Law and Order, but the second sentence where it talks about the student's failure to cooperate will be grounds for disciplinary action. I'd feel better if it said, if we inserted something like a student's failure to cooperate with school officials conducting a search in accordance with these policies will be considered grounds for disciplinary action, so that the students are in a situation to say what you're proposing violates your policy without fear of retaliation. And I'm sure our students will memorize this, but.
Jason, any questions or comments on this policy?
No, nothing for me. Thanks.
Board members, any other discussion? Thank you, Kathleen. This was a big lift, and in a policy, two policies that are really heavy in law, it was helpful to have that legal lens ground our conversation. I think it does provide a great deal of understanding of how we can take steps to afford our families and our students with as many rights as practicable and still follow law. Alex.
And we don't need another discussion of this, but I am curious if there's any of the other legal developments that covered in our earlier resolution that are relevant to this, or if we feel comfortable that this puts us in a stronger position to implement our previous policy from the resolution tonight.
I do think this just really reflects the importance of updating board policy regularly, making sure it continues to reflect the board's and community values along with the law. And then it provides the level of guidance that our staff and our students need in order to understand the way the district operates.
Oh, here we go. I'm back on. Well, board members, we have one final item this evening, future agenda setting. So if now is the time, if there are items you would like add to our agenda prioritization, now is the time to raise them. Melania.
Rob, if you would just confirm for me at some point that waivers are already on there, because I can't remember that.
Yeah,
And then-
revisiting of the graduation requirements specifically.
Yeah, just.
Physical education waivers.
Yeah, that waiver thing. And then I would ask that we put vaping on our list.
Any other items, board members? Seeing as there are none, this meeting is adjourned.